This is day 21 of Pimp, Kabbalah, Kabbalah and Coffee. It's whatever you want it to be. I was thinking, it's Shabbat or whatever. There's like a 86% chance that it's not. And I work in chances. It's like, Halakha doesn't work in chances or percentages. Well, dog, Halakha sucks. Does it? No, it's tight. It's like, dog, science. It's really fucking important. I'm frustrated I can't learn more about aliens at this moment. Why? It's just, where are you going to get your information? Are you done? Is this the end of your fucking story? No. What are you gonna learn? I don't know. Something about Kabbalah. Like what? I don't know. We'll figure it out. All right. Why are you in such a bad mood? I'm not. I feel very blessed. Slanging a dick like a pimp. All right. So what's the deal? I don't know. I've got to just get in my mood. Even God rested one day a week. Like, isn't this work? No. Why? Because I'm just talking. Nobody said God couldn't talk. Why? I don't know. That's like not for me to decide. That's all just like stuff. It's tradition. All right. So what are we learning today? We'll learn Kabbalah. Anything else? Oh yeah, I want to learn the fucking nicknames of rabbis. That's a good one. Why? Why the fuck not? All right, so what are we learning? We have to learn at least one thing about Kabbalah every fucking day. Why? Why not? Who's Gershom Scholem? That motherfucker who moved from Germany to Israel. Talked about this shit. We learned about that yesterday. What is this bullshit? I feel like we've learned everything. Psych, bitch. I'm sure there's some Kabbalistic book we haven't learned. What about history of Jewish mysticism? I feel like we already read this one. But if you don't know it, then it's like, dog, I am so disappointed in Kabbalah. But I guess that's how it's going to be. I really felt like I'd start learning this and there'd be like moons and stars and like that fucking meme. None of that. Or I feel like that other meme with all the math and shit. It's just like, dog. It's just, if you really want to know, Moshe de Leon made up a whole bunch of shit in the 13th century. Probably. It's like 99 to 1 odds. Now, as we worked through, the Rebbe could have said, like that one thing that we had the Rebbe say. That doesn't mean that it wasn't true. That doesn't mean it was true either. But I don't know. All right, let's roll, baby.
The history of Jewish mysticism encompasses various forms of esoteric and spiritual practices aimed at understanding the divine and the hidden aspects of existence.
Oh yeah, this shit sucks. Kabbalah sucks.
By different historical, cultural, and religious contexts. Among the most prominent forms of Jewish mysticism is Kabbalah, which emerged in the 12th century and has since become a central component of Jewish mystical thought. Other notable early forms include prophetic and apocalyptic mysticism, which are evident in biblical and post-biblical texts. The roots of Jewish mysticism can be traced back to the biblical era, with prophetic figures such as Elisha and Ezekiel experiencing divine visions and encounters. This tradition continued into the apocalyptic period, where texts like 1 Enoch and the Book of Daniel introduced complex angelology and eschatological themes. The Haggadah and Merkava literature, dating from the 2nd century to the early medieval period, further developed these mystical themes, focusing on visionary ascents to the heavenly palaces and the divine chariot. The medieval period saw the formalization of Kabbalah, particularly in southern France and Spain. Foundational texts such as the Badr and the Zohar were composed during this time, laying the groundwork for later developments. The Kabbalistic teachings of this era delved deeply into the nature of the divine, the structure of the universe, and the process of creation. Notable Kabbalists like Moses de Leon played crucial roles in disseminating these teachings, which were characterized by their profound symbolic and allegorical interpretations of the Torah. In the early modern period, Lurianic Kabbalah, founded by Isaac Luria in the 16th century, introduced new metaphysical concepts such as tzimtzum, divine contraction, and tikkun cosmic, repair, which have had a lasting impact on Jewish thought. The 18th century saw the rise of Hasidism, a movement that integrated Kabbalistic ideas into a popular, revivalist context, emphasizing personal mystical experience and the presence of the divine in everyday life. Today, the academic study of Jewish mysticism, pioneered by scholars like Gershom Scholem, continues to explore its historical, textual, and philosophical dimensions. Origins. According to the traditional Kabbalistic understanding, Kabbalah dates from Eden. It came down from a remote past as a revelation to elect tzaddikim, righteous people, and, for the most part, was preserved only by a privileged few. Talmudic Judaism records its view of the proper protocol for teaching secrets in the Talmud. Tractate Hayyuga, 11b. One may not expound the topic of forbidden sexual relations before 3 or more individuals, nor may one expound the act of creation and the secrets of the beginning of the world before 2 or more individuals, nor may one expound by oneself the design of the divine chariot, a mystical teaching with regard to the ways God conducts the world, unless he is wise and understands most matters on his own terms. Originally, Kabbalistic knowledge was believed to be an integral part of the oral Torah, given by God to Moses on Mount Sinai around the 13th century BC according to its followers, although some believe that Kabbalah began with Adam. For a few centuries, the esoteric knowledge was referred to by its aspect practice meditation Hitbonina, Hebrew, Rebbe Nachman of Breslov's Hitbonina, Hebrew, translated as being alone or isolating oneself, or by a different term describing the actual, desired goal of the practice prophecy, Nebuah, Hebrew. Kabbalistic scholar R.A. Kaplan traces the origins of medieval Kabbalistic meditative methods to their inheritance from orally transmitted remnants of the biblical prophetic tradition, and reconstructs their terminology and speculated techniques. From the 5th century BCE, when the works of the Tanakh were edited and canonized and the secret knowledge encrypted within the various writings and scrolls, Megillah, esoteric knowledge became referred to as Masa Merkava, Hebrew, and Masa Bereshit, Hebrew, respectively the act of the chariot and the act of creation. Merkava mysticism alluded to the encrypted knowledge and meditation methods within the book of the prophet Ezekiel describing his vision of the divine chariot. Bereshit mysticism referred to the first chapter of Genesis, Hebrew, in the Torah that is believed to contain secrets of the creation of the universe and forces of nature. These terms received their later historical documentation and description in the 2nd chapter of the Talmudic tractate Hayyuga from the early century CE. Confidence in new prophetic revelation closed after the biblical return from Babylon in Second Temple Judaism, shifting to canonization and exegesis of scripture after Ezra the scribe. Lesser level prophecy of Ruach HaKodesh remained, with angelic revelations, esoteric heavenly secrets, and eschatological deliverance from Greek and Roman oppression of apocalyptic literature among early Jewish proto-mystical circles, such as the Book of Daniel and the Dead Sea Scrolls community of Qumran. Early Jewish mystical literature inherited the developing concerns and remnants of prophetic and apocalyptic Judaisms. Mystic elements of the Torah. When read by later generations of Kabbalists, the Torah's description of the creation in the book of Genesis reveals mysteries about God himself, the true nature of Adam and Eve, the Garden of Eden, the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and the tree of life, as well as the interaction of these supernatural entities with the serpent, which leads to disaster when they eat the forbidden fruit, as recorded in Genesis 3. The Bible provides ample additional material for mythic and mystical speculation. The prophet Ezekiel's visions in particular attracted much mystical speculation, as did Isaiah's temple vision. Other mystical events include Jacob's vision of the ladder to heaven, and Moses' encounters with the burning bush and God on Mount Sinai. The 72-letter name of God, which is used in Jewish mysticism for meditation purposes, is derived from the Hebrew verbal utterance Moses spoke in the presence of an angel, while the Sea of Reeds parted, allowing the Hebrews to escape their approaching attackers. The miracle of the Exodus, which led to Moses receiving the 10 Commandments and the Jewish Orthodox view of the acceptance of the Torah at Mount Sinai, preceded the creation of the first Jewish nation approximately 300 years before King Saul. Talmudic era. In early rabbinic Judaism, the early centuries of the first millennium CE, the terms Masa Bereshit, works of creation, and Masa Merkava, works of the divine throne chariot, clearly indicate the midrashic nature of these speculations. They are really based upon Genesis 1 and Ezekiel 1, 428, while the names Sitri Torah, hidden aspects of the Torah Talmud Act 13a, and Razai Torah, Torah secrets, Abbi 1 indicate their character as secret lore. Talmudic doctrine forbade the public teaching of esoteric doctrines and warned of their dangers. In the Mishnah, Hayyuga 2, 1, rabbis were warned to teach the mystical creation doctrines only to one student at a time, to highlight the danger. In one Jewish Akkadic, legendary, anecdote, 4 prominent rabbis of the Mishnaic period, 1st century CE, are said to have visited the orchard, that is, paradise, Partis, Hebrew, lit, orchard. 4 men entered Partis, Ben Azai, Ben Zoma, Acre, Elisha, Ben Abuiah, and Akiva. Ben Azai looked and died, Ben Zoma looked and went mad, Acre destroyed the plants, Akiva entered in peace and departed in peace. In notable readings of this legend, only Rabbi Akiva was fit to handle the study of mystical doctrines. The Tosafot, medieval commentaries on the Talmud, say that the 4 sages did not go up literally, but it appeared to them as if they went up. On the other hand, Louis Ginsburg writes in the Jewish Encyclopedia, 1901-1906, that the journey to paradise is to be taken literally and not allegorically. In contrast to the Kabbalists, Maimonides interprets Partis as philosophy and not mysticism. Medieval emergence of the Kabbalah. Modern scholars have identified several mystical brotherhoods that functioned in Europe starting in the 12th century. Some, such as the Iron Circle and the unique Cherub Circle, were truly esoteric, remaining largely anonymous. The first documented historical emergence of theosophical Kabbalistic doctrine occurred among Jewish sages of Provence and Languedoc in southern France in the latter 1100s, with the appearance or consolidation of the mysterious work of Bahir, Book of Brightness, a midrash describing God's Sephirot attributes as a dynamic interacting hypostatic drama in the divine realm, and the school of Isaac the Blind, 1160-1235, among critics of the rationalist influence of Maimonides. From their Kabbalah spread to Catalonia and northeast Spain around the central rabbinic figure of Maimonides, the Rambam, 1194-1270, in the early 1200s, with a Neoplatonic orientation focused on the upper Sephirot. Subsequently, Kabbalistic doctrine reached its fullest classic expression among Castilian Kabbalists from the latter 1200s, with the Zohar, Book of Splendor literature, concerned with cosmic healing of Gnostic dualities between the lower, revealed male and female attributes of God. Rishonim, elder sages of exoteric Judaism who were deeply involved in Kabbalistic activity, gave the Kabbalah wide scholarly acceptance, including Maimonides and Baha'i Ben Asher, Rabbeinu Bihai, died 1340, whose classic commentaries on the Torah reference Kabbalistic esotericism. Among the Jews of Spain, the study of Kabbalah and philosophy was not a peripheral phenomenon. It often occurred alongside and within Talmudic scholarship. In the early 15th century, there was a notable resurgence of interest in Kabbalah, possibly in response to the forced conversions to Christianity in the late 14th century. This resurgence likely reflected a need for theological consolidation in the face of both Christianity and contemporary philosophical influences. Many Orthodox Jews reject the idea that Kabbalah underwent significant historical development or change such as has been proposed above. After the composition known as the Zohar was presented to the public in the 13th century, the term Kabbalah began to refer more specifically to teachings derived from, or related to, the Zohar. At an even later time, the term began to generally be applied to Zoharic teachings as elaborated upon by Isaac Luria, the Arizal. Historians generally date the start of Kabbalah as a major influence in Jewish thought and practice with the publication of the Zohar and climaxing with the spread of the Lurianic teachings. The majority of Haredi Jews accept the Zohar as the representative of the Maseh Merkava and Maseh Bereshit that are referred to in Talmudic texts. Ecstatic Kabbalah. Contemporary with the Zoharic efflorescence of Spanish Theosophical Theurgic Kabbalah, Spanish exilarch Abraham Abulafia developed his own alternative, Maimonidean system of ecstatic prophetic Kabbalah meditation, each consolidating aspects of acclaimed inherited mystical tradition from biblical times. This was the classic time when various different interpretations of an esoteric meaning to Torah were articulated among Jewish thinkers. Abulafia interpreted Theosophical Kabbalah Sephirot divine attributes, not as supernal hypostases which he opposed, but in psychological terms. Instead of influencing harmony in the divine real by theurgy, his meditative scheme aimed for mystical union with God, drawing down prophetic influx on the individual. He saw this meditation using divine names as a superior form of Kabbalistic ancient tradition. His version of Kabbalah, followed in the medieval Eastern Mediterranean, remained a marginal stream to mainstream Theosophical Kabbalah development. Abulafian elements were later incorporated into the 16th century Theosophical Kabbalistic systemizations of Moses Cordovero and Haim Bible. Through them, later Hasidic Judaism incorporated elements of Unio-Mystica and psychological focus from Abulafia. Early modern era. Lurianic Kabbalah. Following the upheavals and dislocations in the Jewish world as a result of anti-Judaism during the Middle Ages, and the national trauma of the expulsion from Spain in 1492, closing the Spanish Jewish flowering, Jews began to search for signs of when the long-awaited Jewish Messiah would come to comfort them in their painful exiles. In the 16th century, the community of Safed in the Galilee became the center of Jewish mystical, exegetically, legal and liturgical developments. The Safe mystics responded to the Spanish expulsion by turning Kabbalistic doctrine and practice towards a messianic focus. Moses Cordovero, the Ramat 1522-1570, and his school popularized the teachings of the Zohar which had until then been only a restricted work. Cordovero's comprehensive works achieved the first, quasi-rationalistic, of Theosophical Kabbalah's two systemizations, harmonizing preceding interpretations of the Zohar on its own apparent terms. The author of the Shulchan Aruch, the normative Jewish code of law, Yosef Karo, 1488-1575, was also a scholar of Kabbalah who kept a personal mystical diary. Moshe Elshich wrote a mystical commentary on the Torah, and Shlomo Alkabetz wrote Kabbalistic commentaries and poems. The messianism of the Safe mystics culminated in Kabbalah receiving its biggest transformation in the Jewish world with the explication of its new interpretation from Isaac Luria, the Ari 1534-1572, by his disciples Haim Bible and Israel Sarah, both transcribed Luria's teachings, in variant forms, gaining them widespread popularity. Sarah taking Lurianic Kabbalah to Europe, Bible authoring the latterly canonical version. Luria's teachings came to rival the influence of the Zohar, and Luria stands, alongside Moses de Leon, as the most influential mystic in Jewish history. Lurianic Kabbalah gave Theosophical Kabbalah its second, complete, super-rational, of two systemizations, reading the Zohar in light of its most esoteric sections, the Idrut, replacing the broken Sephirot attributes of God with rectified parts of him, divine personas, embracing reincarnation, repair, and the urgency of cosmic Jewish messianism dependent on each person's soul tasks. Influence on non-Jewish society. From the European Renaissance on, Judaic Kabbalah became a significant influence in non-Jewish culture, fully divorced from the separately evolving Judaic tradition. Kabbalah received the interest of Christian Hebraist scholars and occultists, who freely syncretized and adapted it to diverse non-Jewish spiritual traditions and belief systems of Western esotericism. Christian Kabbalists from the 15th, 18th centuries adapted what they saw as ancient biblical wisdom to Christian theology, while Hermeticism lead to Kabbalah's incorporation into Western magic through Hermetic Kabbalah. Presentations of Kabbalah in occult and New Age books on Kabbalah bear little resemblance to Judaic Kabbalah. Ban on studying Kabbalah. The rabbinic ban on studying Kabbalah in Jewish society was lifted by the efforts of the 16th century Kabbalist Avraham Azulay, 1570-1643. I have found it written that all that has been decreed above forbidding open involvement in the wisdom of truth was the limited time period until the year 5250, 1490 CE. From then on after is called the last generation, and what was forbidden is allowed, and permission is granted to occupy ourselves in the Zohar. And from the year 5300, 1540 CE, it is most desirable that the masses, both those great and small, should occupy themselves, as it says in the Riot of Hemna, and because in this merit King Mashiach will come in the future and not in any other merit, it is not proper to be discouraged. The question, however, is whether the ban ever existed in the first place. Concerning the above quote by Avraham Azulay, it has found many versions in English. Another is this. From the year 1540 and onward, the basic levels of Kabbalah must be taught publicly to everyone, young and old. Only through Kabbalah will we forever eliminate war, destruction, and man's inhumanity to his fellow man. The lines concerning the year 1490 are also missing from the Hebrew edition of Hist al Avraham, the source work that both of these quote from. Furthermore, by Azulay's view, the ban was lifted 30 years before his birth, a time that would have corresponded with Haim Bidel's publication of the teaching of Isaac Luria. Moshe Isserles understood there to be only a minor restriction. In his words, one's belly must be full of meat and wine, discerning between the prohibited and the permitted. He is supported by the beer-headed, the Pithui Teshuvah as well as the Vilna Gaon. The Vilna Gaon says, there was never any ban or enactment restricting the study of the wisdom of Kabbalah. Any who says there is has never studied Kabbalah, has never seen Partis, and speaks as an ignoramus. Sephardi and Mizrahi. The Kabbalah of the Sephardi, Iberian Peninsula, and Mizrahi, Middle East, North Africa, and the Caucasus. Torah scholars has a long history. Kabbalah in various forms was widely studied, commented upon, and expanded by North African, Turkish, Yemenite, and Asian scholars from the 16th century onward. It flourished among Sephardic Jews in Tzfat, Safe, even before the arrival of Isaac Luria. Yosef Karo, author of the Shulchan Aruch, was part of the Tzfat school of Kabbalah. Shlomo Alkabetz, author of the hymn Lekadodi, taught there. His disciple Moses ben Jacob Cordovero, or Cordovero, authored Partis Rimonim, and Organase, exhaustive compilation of Kabbalistic teachings on a variety of subjects up to that point. Cordovero headed the Academy of Tzfat until his death, when Isaac Luria rose to prominence. Rabbi Moshe's disciple Eliyahu David has authored the classic work, Rishon Chachna, combining Kabbalistic and Musar, moral. The Oriental Kabbalist tradition. His disciple Moses ben Jacob Cordovero, or Cordovero, authored Partis Ruminum, an organized, exhaustive compilation of Kabbalistic teachings on a variety of subjects up to that point. Cordovero headed the Academy of Tzfat until his death, when Isaac Luria rose to prominence. Rabbi Moshe's disciple Eliyahu David has authored the classic work, Reishit Chachma, combining Kabbalistic and Musar, moral, teachings. Chaim Vital also studied under Cordovero, but with the arrival of Luria became his main disciple. Vital claimed to be the only one authorized to transmit the Ari's teachings, though other disciples also published books presenting Luria's teachings. The Oriental Kabbalist tradition continues until today among Sephardi and Mizrahi Hakam sages and study circles. Among leading figures were the Yemenite Shalom Sharabi, 1720-1777, of the Beit El Synagogue, the Jerusalemite Hida, 1724-1806, the Baghdad leader Ben Ish Chai, 1832-1909, and the Abu Hatzir dynasty. Materal. One of the most innovative theologians in early modern Judaism was Judah Loeb ben Bezalel, 1525-1609, known as the Materal of Prague. Many of his written works survive and are studied for their unusual combination of the mystical and philosophical approaches in Judaism. While conversant in Kabbalistic learning, he expresses Jewish mystical thought in his own individual approach without reference to Kabbalistic terms. The Materal is most well known in popular culture for the legend of the Golem of Prague, associated with him in folklore. However, his thought influenced Hasidism, for example being studied in the introspective Brzezica school. During the 20th century, Isaac Hutner, 1906-1980, continued to spread the Materal's works indirectly through his own teachings and publications within the non-Hasidic yeshiva world. Sabbatian antinomian movements. The spiritual and mystical yearnings of many Jews remained frustrated after the death of Isaac Luria and his disciples and colleagues. No hope was in sight for many following the devastation and mass killings of the pogroms that followed in the wake of the Chmielnicki uprising, 1648-1654, the largest single massacre of Jews until the Holocaust. And it was at this time that a controversial scholar by the name of Sabbatai Zevi, 1626-1676, captured the hearts and minds of the Jewish masses of that time with the promise of a newly minted messianic millennialism in the form of his own personage. His charisma, mystical teachings that included repeated pronunciations of the Holy Tetragrammaton in public, tied to an unstable personality, and with the help of his greatest enthusiast, Nathan of Gaza, convinced the Jewish masses that the Jewish Messiah had finally come. It seemed that the esoteric teachings of Kabbalah had found their champion and had triumphed. But this era of Jewish history unraveled when Zevi became an apostate to Judaism by converting to Islam after he was arrested by the Ottoman Sultan and threatened with execution for attempting a plan to conquer the world and rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. Unwilling to give up their messianic expectations, a minority of Zevi's Jewish followers converted to Islam along with him. Many of his followers, known as Sabbatians, continued to worship him in secret, explaining his conversion not as an effort to save his life but to recover the sparks of the holy in each religion, and most leading rabbis were always on guard to root them out. The Deen movement in modern Turkey is a surviving remnant of the Sabbatian schism. Theologies developed by leaders of Sabbatian movements dealt with antinomian redemption of the realm of impurity through sin, based on Lurianic theory. Moderate views reserved this dangerous task for the divine Messiah Sabbatai Zevi alone, while his followers remained observant Jews. Radical forms spoke of the messianic transcendence of Torah, and required Sabbatian followers to emulate him, either in private or publicly. Due to the chaos caused in the Jewish world, the rabbinic prohibition against studying Kabbalah established itself firmly within the Jewish religion. One of the conditions allowing a man to study and engage himself in the Kabbalah was to be at least 40 years old. This age requirement came about during this period and is not Talmudic in origin but rabbinic. Many Jews are familiar with this ruling, but are not aware of its origins. Moreover, the prohibition is not halakhic in nature. According to Moses Cordovero, halakhically, one must be of age 20 to engage in the Kabbalah. Many famous Kabbalists, including the Ari, Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, Yehuda Ashlag, were younger than 20 when they began. The Sabbatian movement was followed by that of the Frankists, disciples of Jacob Frank, 1726-1791, who eventually became an apostate to Judaism by apparently converting to Catholicism. Frank took the Sabbatian impulse to its nihilistic end, declaring himself part of the Messianic Trinity along with his daughter, and that breaking all of Torah was its fulfillment. This era of disappointment did not stem the Jewish masses' yearnings for mystical leadership. Modern era. Traditional Kabbalah. Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, 1707-1746, based in Italy, was a precocious Talmudic scholar who deduced a need for the public teaching and study of Kabbalah. He established a yeshiva for Kabbalah study and actively recruited students. He wrote copious manuscripts in an appealing clear Hebrew style, all of which gained the attention of both admirers and rabbinical critics, who feared another Sabbatai Zevi, false messiah, in the making. His rabbinical opponents forced him to close his school, hand over and destroy many of his most precious unpublished Kabbalistic writings, and go into exile in the Netherlands. He eventually moved to the land of Israel. Some of his most important works, such as Derek Hashem, survive and serve as a gateway to the world of Jewish mysticism. Elisha of Vilna, Vilna Gaon 1720-1797, based in Lithuania, had his teachings encoded and publicized by his disciples, such as Chaim Voloshin's posthumously published the mystical ethical work Nefesh HaHaim. He staunchly opposed the new Hasidic movement and warned against their public displays of religious fervor inspired by the mystical teachings of their rabbis. Although the Vilna Gaon did not look with favor on the Hasidic movement, he did not prohibit the study and engagement in the Kabbalah. This is evident from his writings in the Even Shlema. He that is able to understand secrets of the Torah and does not try to understand them will be judged harshly. May God have mercy. The Vilna Gaon, Even Shlema, 824. The redemption will only come about through learning Torah, and the essence of the redemption depends upon learning Kabbalah. The Vilna Gaon, Even Shlema, 11:3. In the Oriental tradition of Kabbalah, Shalom Sharabi, 1720-1777, from Yemen was a major esoteric clarifier of the works of the Ari, the Beit El Synagogue, yeshiva of the Kabbalists, which he came to head, was one of the few communities to bring Lurianic meditation into communal prayer. Hasidic Judaism. Yisrael ben Eliezer Baal Shem Tov, 1698-1760, founder of Hasidism in the area of Ukraine, spread teachings based on Lurianic Kabbalah, but adapted to a different aim of immediate psychological perception of divine omnipresence amidst the mundane. The emotional, ecstatic fervor of early Hasidism developed from previous mystering circles of mystical activity, but instead sought communal revival of the common folk by reframing Judaism around the central principle of Devika, mystical cleaving to God, for all. This new approach turned formerly esoteric elite Kabbalistic theory into a popular social mysticism movement for the first time, with its own doctrines, classic texts, teachings and customs. From the Baal Shem Tov sprang the wide ongoing schools of Hasidic Judaism, each with different approaches and thought. Hasidism instituted a new concept of tzaddik leadership in Jewish mysticism, where the elite scholars of mystical texts now took on a social role as embodiments and intercessors of divinity for the masses. With the 19th century consolidation of the movement, leadership became dynastic. Among later Hasidic schools, Rebbe Nachman of Breslov, 1772-1810, the great-grandson of the Baal Shem Tov, revitalized and further expanded the latter's teachings, amassing a following of thousands in Ukraine, Belarus, Lithuania, and Poland. In a unique amalgam of Hasidic and Mithnaged approaches, Rebbe Nachman emphasized study of both Kabbalah and serious Torah scholarship to his disciples. His teachings also differed from the way other Hasidic groups were developing, as he rejected the idea of hereditary Hasidic dynasties and taught that each Hasid must search for the tzaddik, saintly righteous person, for himself and within himself. The Habib Lubavitch intellectual school of Hasidism broke away from general Hasidism's emotional faith orientation by making the mind central as the root to the internal heart. Its texts combine what they view as rational investigation with explanation of Kabbalah through articulating unity in a common divine essence. In recent times, the messianic element latent in Hasidism has come to the fore in heaven. Haskalah opposition to mysticism. The Jewish Haskalah, Hebrew, Enlightenment movement from the late 1700s renewed an ideology of rationalism in Judaism, giving birth to critical Judaic scholarship. It presented Judaism in apologetic terms, strict of mysticism and myth, in line with Jewish emancipation. Many foundational historians of Judaism, such as Heinrich Graetz, criticized Kabbalah as a foreign import that compromised historical Judaism. In the 20th century, Gershom Scholem overturned Jewish historiography, presenting the centrality of Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah to historical Judaism, and their subterranean life as the true creative renewing spirit of Jewish thought and culture. His influence contributed to the flourishing of Jewish mysticism academia today, its impact on wider intellectual currents, and the contribution of mystical spirituality in modernist Jewish denominations today, traditionalist Kabbalah and Hasidism, meanwhile, continued outside the academic interest in it. 20th century influence. Jewish mysticism has influenced the thought of some major Jewish theologians, philosophers, writers, and thinkers in the 20th century, outside of Kabbalistic or Hasidic traditions. The first chief rabbi of Mandate Palestine, Abraham Isaac Kook, was a mystical thinker who drew heavily on Kabbalistic notions through his own poetic terminology. His writings are concerned with fusing the false divisions between sacred and secular, rational and mystical, legal and imaginative. Students of Joseph B. Soloveitchik, figurehead of American modern Orthodox Judaism, have read the influence of Kabbalistic symbols in his philosophical works. Neo-Hasidism, rather than Kabbalah, shaped Martin Buber's philosophy of dialogue, and Abraham Joshua Heschel's conservative Judaism. Lurianic symbols of Tzimtzum and Shever have informed Holocaust theologians. Gershom Scholem's central academic influence on reshaping Jewish historiography in favor of myth and imagination made historical arcane Kabbalah of relevance to wide intellectual discourse in the 20th century. Moshe Adel traces the influences of Kabbalistic and Hasidic concepts on diverse thinkers such as Walter Benjamin, Jacques Derrida, Franz Kafka, Franz Rosenzweig, Arnaldo Monigliano, Paul Celan, and George Steiner. Harold Bloom has seen Kabbalistic hermeneutics as the paradigm for Western literary criticism. Sanford Traub discusses the direct and indirect influence of Kabbalah on the depth psychologies of Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung, as well as modern and postmodern philosophers, in his project to develop new intellectual relevance and open dialogue for Kabbalah. The interaction of Kabbalah with modern physics, as with other mystical traditions, has generated its own literature. Traditional Kabbalist Yitzchak Ginsburg brings esoteric dimensions of advanced Kabbalistic symmetry into relationship with mathematics and the sciences, including renaming the elementary particles of quantum theory with Kabbalistic Hebrew names, and developing Kabbalistic approaches to debates in evolutionary theory.
So let's say, same thing.
This article lists figures in Kabbalah according to historical chronology and schools of thought. In popular reference, Kabbalah has been used to refer to the whole history of Jewish mysticism, but more accurately, and is used in academic Jewish studies, Kabbalah refers to the doctrines, practices, and esoteric exegetically method in Torah that emerged in 12th, 13th century southern France and Spain, and was developed further in 16th century Ottoman Palestine. These formed the basis of subsequent Jewish mystical development. This is a partial list of Jewish Kabbalists. Secondary literature incorporating Kabbalah is enormous, particularly in the voluminous library of Hasidic Judaism that turned esoteric Kabbalah into a popular revivalist movement. Hasidism both adapted Kabbalah to its own internalized psychological concern, and also continued the development of the Jewish mystical tradition. Therefore, only formative articulators of Hasidic thought, or particularly Kabbalistic schools authors in Hasidism, are included here. In the Sabbatean mystical heresy that broke away from Judaism, only the founders are listed. Solely academic university Jewish studies researchers of Jewish mysticism, not being Kabbalists, nor necessarily Jewish, are not listed here, nor are separate non-Jewish derivative syncretic traditions of Kabbalah. Rabbinic figures in Judaism are often known after the name of their magnum opus, or as Hebrew acronyms based on their name, preceded by R for Rabbi Rab. Only Jewish mysticism. Talmudic Tanaic sages, Masa Merkaba, mystical chariot Masa Bereshit, mystical creation, 1st, 2nd centuries, Yordei Merkaba, chariot writers, Hekala, palaces, mysticism, 1st, 11th centuries. Early formative texts are variously traditional, attributed, anonymous, pseudepigraphical. Hasidic Ashkenaz, 1150-1250 German pietists, mystical conceptions influenced medieval Kabbalah. Medieval emergence and development of Kabbalah, 12th, 15th centuries. Provence Circle, southern France, Provence and Languedoc, 12th, 13th centuries. Catalonia Girona Circle, northeast Spain, 13th century. Castile Circle, northern Spain, 13th century. Developed demonic Gnostic theory. Ecstatic prophetic meditative Kabbalah, 13th century. Publication of the Zohar, 1280s, 90s, northern Spain. 13th century Kabbalistic commentary. 14th, 15th centuries saw a slowing continuation in Kabbalistic commentary. Fusional influences, 15th, 17th centuries. Influence of medieval Jewish rationalism in Spain declined, culminating with the expulsion. Jewish fusions of philosophy and Kabbalah were shared by wider non-Jewish Renaissance trends, not listed here. 16th century Kabbalistic Renaissance. Emigres, some from Spain, some founding new center of State in Ottoman Palestine. Cordoverian school, rationally influenced systemization of preceding Kabbalah. Lurianic school, new mythological systemization of Kabbalah, basis of modern Kabbalah, Kitvei Ha'ari writings of the Ari written by disciples. Safe dissemination. 16th, 19th century Kabbalistic commentary. Central European Kabbalist rabbis. Italian Kabbalists. Sephardi Mizrahi, Oriental, Kabbalah. Sabbatean mystical heresy, founders only. Eastern European Baal Shem Nisterim and other mystical circles. Menactic Lithuanian Kabbalah. Hasidic popularization of Kabbalah, 18th century present. Kabbalistic notions pervade Hasidic thought, but it developed a new approach to Kabbalah, replacing esoteric theosophical focus with successive psychological internalization. Therefore, only a minimal listing of Hasidic figures is given here. Founding formative figures were commentators on esoteric Kabbalah text tradition. Founding East European Hasidic masters. Other Hasidic commentators on Kabbalah. 20th century Kabbalah. From diverse traditions in Kabbalah, excluding Hasidic thought's internalization approach. Modern teachers of Jewish mysticism. Individual teachers of Jewish mysticism, spirituality, and modern style articulations. Solely academic teachers in Jewish studies research are not listed here. Orthodox Kabbalistic Hasidic. Non-Orthodox Neo-Hasidic Jewish renewal. Universalist style Jewish teachers. See also.
All right. So we're going to go through these individually, not all today. But I'm going to make sure that we know these motherfuckers like the back of our hands. Who the fuck is this bitch?
Nehemiah ben Hakana, Hebrew, Romanized, and Uni ben Hakan, was a Tana of the 1st and 2nd centuries. It appears from Bavabatra 10b that Nehemiah was a contemporary, but not a pupil, of Yohanan ben Zakkai. He was the teacher of Ishmael ben Elisha. Nehemiah was rich and had a large retinue of servants, but he was distinguished for his meekness and forgiving nature, to which he attributed his attainment of great age. 2 short prayers composed by him exhibit the same qualities. According to Johanan bar Nappa in Shevu 26a, Nehemiah interpreted the entire Torah by the hermeneutic rule known as the general and particular, Kalalafra, a rule which his pupil Rabbi Ishmael made the 8th of his 13 hermeneutic rules. Nehemiah is frequently mentioned in the Talmud. In Hulin 129b he is referred to disagreeing with Eliezer ben Hyrcanus and Joshua ben Hananiah regarding a halakha. In a post-Talmudic text, he said that the Pharaoh of the Exodus was rescued from the Red Sea, that he repented, that he afterward reigned in Nineveh, and that it was he who in the time of Jonah exhorted the inhabitants of Nineveh to repentance. Nehemiah is known also for his ethical saying, whoever accepts upon him the yoke of the Torah, from him is removed the yoke of royalty and that of worldly care, and whoever throws off the yoke of the Torah, upon him is made the yoke of royalty and that of worldly care. As Rabbi Ishmael, Nehemiah's disciple, is regarded by the Kabbalists as their chief representative. Nehemiah is considered to have been Ishmael's teacher in mysticism also. He is generally supposed to have been the author of the daily prayer beginning on Avi Koch, the initials of which form the 42-lettered name of God. He is also supposed by some to have been the author of the Vater, Sefer HaTemuna, and of the Sefer HaPelia.
But I thought it could have been. It was written by Isaac the Blind, maybe. We're going to go through this thing again.
Vater or Sefer HaVater, Hebrew pronunciation, Book of Clarity or Book of Illumination is an anonymous mystical work, attributed to a 1st century rabbinic sage Nehemiah ben Hakana, a contemporary of Yochanan ben Zakkai, because it begins with the words, Nehemiah ben Hakana said. It is also known as Midrash of Rabbi Nehemiah ben Hakana. First mentioned in late 12th century Languedoc-Provençal works, the Vater is an early work of the esoteric Jewish mystical tradition that eventually became known as Kabbalah. The work is considered by scholars to be pseudepigraphical, composed in Provence in the late 12th century. Title. Maimonides, in his commentary on the Torah, Genesis 1, is one of the first to quote the work under the title Midrash Nehemiah ben Hakana. Nehemiah ben Hakana said, the opening sentence. Among medieval Kabbalists it became known as Sefer HaVater, taken from its opening comment. One verse says, and now men see not the light which is bright, Vater, in the skies, Job 37 hours, and 21 minutes. Authorship. Kabbalists described authorship of the Vater to Nehemiah, a rabbi of the Mishnaic era, who lived around 100 CE. Medieval Kabbalists write that the Vater did not come down to them as a unified book, but rather in pieces found in scattered scrolls and booklets. The scattered and fragmentary nature of the Vater's text, which sometimes ends discussion in mid-sentence, and which often jumps randomly from topic to topic, supports this claim. A historical critical study of this book points to a later date of composition. For some time scholars believe that it was written in the 13th century by Isaac the Blind, or by those in his school. The first sentence, and now men see not the light which is bright in the skies, Job 37 hours, and 21 minutes, being isolated, and having no connection with what follows, was taken to be an allusion to the blindness of its author. However, modern scholars of Kabbalah now hold that at least part of the Vater was an adaptation of an older work, the Sefer HaRabbi. This older book is mentioned in some of the works of the Geonim. However, no complete copies of Sefer HaRabbi are still in existence. However, quotes from this book can still be found in some older works. Scholar Roni Meroz argues that elements in the Vater date back to 10th century Babylonia, as witnessed by the acceptance of the Babylonian system of vowel points, which later fell into disuse, while other elements were written in 12th century Provence. Many scholars of Kabbalah hold that the Vater adds Gnostic elements to the older work. The question of how much Gnosticism has influenced Kabbalah is one of the major themes of modern-day research on Kabbalah. See the works of Gershom Scholem and Moshe Adel for more information. History. The 13th century Kabbalist, Rabbi Isaac HaKohen, reports that the Sefer HaVater came from the land of Israel to the early pietists, the sages of Ashkenaz, the Kabbalists of Germany, and from there to the early wise men in Provence who chase after all sorts of written reports of wisdom, those who know the divine, supernal knowledge, but they saw only part of the book and not all of it because they did not see it in its entirety, in its complete form. Several distinct literary layers can be distinguished in Vater, some written in the East at the end of the 9th century or in the early 10th century, and some in 12th century Provence. The book Vater's use of the Babylonian grammar and vocalization system, which also reflects a different pronunciation and was widely utilized throughout the East, decisively proves the existence of an Oriental layer. The Babylonian vocalization, as opposed to the Tiberian one used in Hebrew to this day, is mainly upper, that is, marked above the letters, and is characterized, among other properties, by the second being pronounced like a pata. Only if Vater was written in a region in which the Babylonian system was in use can the claim the Lord placed a pata above a letter, and the second beneath be meaningful. The pata is upper according to the Babylonian vocalization system, whereas the second is lower according to the Tiberian system. Only according to the Babylonian system is it possible to pronounce this combination of vowels at the same time, as they both have the same pronunciation, the short U. The use of the Babylonian vocalization system to symbolize the holy is evidence of the passage's date of composition. At the beginning of the 10th century, a debate arose between Jewish communities over which grammatical system most faithfully represented the Torah. In other words, how was it pronounced when it was given to Moses on Mount Sinai? This debate ended with the victory of the Tiberian system and with the understanding that the Babylonian system reflected a foreign influence on the Hebrew language. Thereafter, one could no longer employ it as a proper symbolic instrument for the holy. Hence, the Babylonian layer must have been written before this debate was concluded. Contents. The Babel assumes the form of an exegetic midrash on the first chapters of Genesis. It is divided into 60 short paragraphs or 140 passages, and is in the form of a dialogue between master and disciples. The main characters are Amora, or Amore, and Rahame, or Rehume. Some statements in the book are attributed to Regia, Johanan, Ban, rabbis mentioned in the later midrashic literature. The Babel contains commentaries explaining the mystical significance of biblical verses, the mystical significance of the shapes of the Hebrew letters, the mystical significance of the cantillation signs and vowel points on the letters, the mystical significance of statements in the Sefer Yetzirah, Book of Creation, and the use of sacred names in magic. There are 200 aphorism-like paragraphs. Each paragraph uses references from the Torah to expand upon its presentation. As with all Kabbalistic texts, the meanings are highly symbolic and subject to numerous opportunities for interpretation. A common analogy is used throughout. A king, his servants, his daughter, and his gardens are all used to explain a meaning, first of Torah and then in general, of the main topic of the text. The paragraphs refer to each other in segments and are broken into 5 sections in the Aryeh Kaplan translation. These sections are loosely grouped together, but they do more or less stay within the underlying themes given by their title. Sections. Section 1, B116 consists of commentary on the first verses of Genesis or of the creation story. Section 2, B1744, talks about the Aleph Bet or the Hebrew alphabet and gets its inspiration from the Sefer Yetzirah, which links these letters of creation to the overall mysticism presented in the Torah. Section 3, B45-122, concerns the 7 voices in the Sephirah. Section 4, B124-193, is grouped under the section title of 10 Sephirah. Section 5, B193-200, completes the discourse and is called Mysteries of the Soul. Sephirah. The Hebrew word Sephir was first described in Sefer Yetzirah as corresponding to the 10 basic numbers, and did not possess the meaning that later Kabbalists gave to it. It is in the Babel that we find the first discussion of the Kabbalistic concept of Sephir as divine attributes and powers emanating from God. Why are they called Sephir? Because it is written, the heavens, Mesoprim, tell, God's glory, Psalms 19, 2, Babel 125.
So he goes and he says to them, I'm paying you, right? And essentially, go use this money to go and purchase for yourself food and drink.
The world, according to the Babel, is not the product of an act of creation. Like God, this book existed from all eternity, not only in potentiality, but in actuality, and the creation consisted merely in the appearance of that which was latent in the first Sephirah, or Haganas, or, as it is called, Keter Elion, which emanated from God. This Sephirah gave birth to Hagna, wisdom, from which emanated being intelligence. From these 3, which are the superior Sephirah, and from the primary principles of the universe, emanated, one after another, the 7 inferior Sephirah from which all material beings are formed. All the 10 Sephirah are linked one to the other, and every one of them has an active and a passive quality emanating and receiving. The efflux of one Sephirah from another is symbolized in the form of the letters of the Hebrew alphabet. Thus the letter Gimel, shaped like a tube open at each end, represents a Sephirah, which receives strength at one end and discharges it at the other. The 10 Sephirah are the energy of God, the forms in which his being manifests itself. Reincarnation. The Babel adopts the concept of reincarnation to solve the question of why the just may suffer in this world, while the wicked may be prosperous. The just may have been wicked in their former lives, and the wicked righteous. Editions and commentaries. One of the most accurate manuscripts of the final form of Sefer Babel was written in 1331 by Meir ben Solomon Abi Salula. His commentary on the Babel was anonymously published as Haganas, the Hidden Light. It has been translated into German by Gershom Scholar, 1923, and into English by Aryeh Kaplan. Recently it has been critically edited by Saverio Campanini. See the Book of Babel, Flavius Mithridates' Latin translation, the Hebrew text, and an English version, edited by Saverio Campanini with the foreword by Giulio Bussi, Torino.
You know, we're like in this time where
It has been translated into
the
German by Gershom Scholar,
shut the fuck up,
1923.
dog. Like the mask of history has been revealed, and we can really start to dive into this stuff. And it's really, I think, because of the advent of the internet that did this. What's Pardes? Orchard, bitch.
Pardes, Hebrew, Pardes, orchard, is the subject of a Jewish Agadah legend about 4 rabbis of the Mishnaic period, 1st century CE, who entered the Pardes, the orchard of esoteric Torah knowledge. Only one of them succeeded in leaving the Pardes unharmed. The basic story goes as follows. 4 entered the orchard, Ben Azai, Ben Zoma, Aker, i.e., Elisha ben Avuiah, and Rabbi Akiva. 1 looked and died, 1 looked and was harmed, 1 looked and cut down the trees, and 1 went up in peace and went down in peace. Babylonian Talmud, Tosefta Hayyuga 2.2. Sources differ concerning which sage died and which became demented. The Tosefta and the Babylonian Talmud say Ben Azai died and Ben Zoma became demented, but the Jerusalem Talmud, Shir HaShir and Rabbah, and the Hekala literature record the reverse. Etymology. The Hebrew word pardes, orchard, is of Persian origin, cf. Avestan, and appears several times in the Bible. The same Old Persian root is the source of the word paradise via Latin paradisus and Greek, which were used for its biblical Hebrew equivalent, garden, in early Bible translations. Samson Levy proposed the Greek paradosis suggests the former examining the claims and early documents of Christianity and that the Tosefta account preserves the scholarly undertaking most accurately. Versions. The story is found in several places, with minor variations. The Tosefta, the Babylonian Talmud, and the Jerusalem Talmud. The earliest context, found in the Tosefta, is the restriction on transmitting mystical teaching concerning the divine chariot except privately to particularly qualified disciples. The Sujaya in the Babylonian Talmud, at Hayyuga 14b, is the best known. The rabbis taught. 4 entered the partis. They were Ben Azai, Ben Zoma, Aker, and Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva said to them, when you come to the place of pure marble stones, do not say, water, water, for it is said, he who speaks untruth shall not stand before my eyes. Ben Azai gazed and died. Regarding him the verse states, precious in the eyes of GT is the death of his pious ones. Ben Zoma gazed and was harmed. Also trans went mad. Regarding him the verse states, did you find honey? Eat only as much as you need, lest you be overfilled and vomited. Aker cut down the plantings. Rabbi Akiva entered in peace and left in peace. Versions of the story also appear in the esoteric Hegelic literature. Exposition. Rashi says that Ben Azai died from looking at the divine presence. Ben Zoma's harm was in losing his sanity. Aker's cutting down the plantings in the orchard refers to becoming a heretic from the experience. Aker means the other one, and is the Talmudic term for the Tana Elisha ben Abuya. Yerushalmi identifies him as Eva on the following line. MSS Munich 6 of the Bavli and Hekalat Sutari read Elisha ben Abuya in place of Aker. Akiva, in contrast to the other three, became the leading rabbinic figure of the era. Rashi explains that the 4 rabbis ascended to heaven by utilizing the divine name, which might be understood as achieving a spiritual elevation through Jewish meditation practices. The Tosafot, medieval commentaries on the Talmud, say that the 4 sages did not go up literally, but it appeared to them as if they went up. On the other hand, Rabbi Louis Ginsburg wrote that the journey to paradise is to be taken literally and not allegorically. According to another interpretation, partis is an acronym for the 4 traditional methods of exegesis in Judaism. In this sense, they were the 4 to understand the whole Torah. Interpretation in Kabbalah. Another version of the legend is also found in the mystical literature, Zohar I, 26b and Tikkunei HaZohar 40, which adds to the story. The ancient Saba, an old man, stood up and said to Shimon Bar Yochai, Rabbi, Rabbi, what is the meaning of what Rabbi Akiva said to his students? When you come to the place of pure marble stones, do not say water, water lest you place yourselves in danger. For it is said, he who speaks untruth shall not stand before my eyes, but it is written, there shall be a firmament between the waters and it shall separate between water, above the firmament, and water, below the firmament. Genesis 1, 6. Since the Torah describes the division of the waters into upper and lower, why should it be problematic to mention this division? Furthermore, since there are upper and lower waters, why did Rabbi Akiva warn them? Do not say, water, water. The Holy Land, a title for Shimon Bar Yochai, replied, Saba, it is proper that you reveal the secret that the Chevria, Rabbi Shimon's circle of disciples, have not grasped clearly. The ancient Saba answered, Rabbi, Rabbi, Holy Land, surely the pure marble stones are the letter Yod, one the upper Yod of the letter Aleph, and one the lower Yod of the letter Aleph. Here there is no spiritual impurity, only pure marble stones, so there is no separation between one water and the other. They form a single unity from the aspect of the tree of life, which is the Vav in the midst of the letter Aleph. In this regard it states, and if he take of the tree of life, and he then live forever. Genesis 3:22. Moses ben Jacob Cordovero explains the Zaharic passage in his Partis Rimonim, Orchard of Pomegranates, whose title itself refers to the Partis mystical ascent. Partis, Shar Rajai Ha-Kinu, entry on Nile water. The meaning of the ascent is understood through Rabbi Akiva's warning. The danger concerns misinterpreting anthropomorphism in Kabbalah, introducing corporeal notions in the divine. Emanations in Kabbalah bridge between the Ein Sof divine unity and the plurality of creation. The fundamental mystical error involves separating between divine transcendence and immanence, as if they were a duality. Rather, all Kabbalistic emanations have no being of their own, but are nullified and dependent on their source of vitality in the one God. Nonetheless, Kabbalah maintains that God is revealed through the life of his emanations, man interacting with divinity in a mutual flow of direct light from above to below and returning light from below to above. The Sephirah, including wisdom, compassion, and kingship, comprise the dynamic life in God's persona. In the highest of the 4 worlds, Atzilith, the complete nullification and unity of the Sephirah and creation is revealed within its divine source. Apparent separation only pertains, in successive degrees, to the lower 3 worlds and our physical realm. Introducing false separation causes the exile of the Shekinah within creation from God. From Cordovero's explanation. The meaning of Rabbi Akiva's warning is that the sages should not declare that there are 2 types of water, since there are not, lest you endanger yourself because of the sin of separation. The marble stones represent the letter Yod, a Yod at the beginning, and a Yod at the end. The first is wisdom, the second kingship, which is also wisdom according to the light that returns from below to above. The upper is the Yod of the Tetragrammaton, first letter, while the lower is the Yod of Adonai, last letter. The latter is female waters, and the former is male waters, the inner and outer aspects, signified by the top and the bottom Yods of the letter Aleph. Each is a stone because its shape is round. White marble indicates compassion, similar to waters of kindness. Wisdom is Yesh being, kinship is Shei reverse. Combined they form Sheish, marble. The letter Shin are the dividing emanations. When the 2 lights combine as marble, the 2 Yods combine as one. These waters are completely pure. Through compassion the daughter, kingship, is able to ascend to her father's house as in her youth. The firmament between them, letter Vav in the Aleph, which is compassion, unites them. There is no separation other than in a place of spiritual impurity. But here there is no impurity. The tree of life in Atzilith.
When is it prohibited for moving to sacred workers have no even drink and popping up the tab? That's only the shopkeeper who extends credit to it because there's transactional immediacy. And it's as if again the credit already has the right.
Akiva ben Joseph, Mishneh Hebrew, Q ben YSP, c. 50 September 28, 135 CE, also known as Rabbi Akiva, was a leading Jewish scholar and sage in the Tana of the latter part of the 1st century and the beginning of the 2nd. Rabbi Akiva was a leading contributor to the Mishnah and to Midrash Halakha. He is referred to in Tosafot as Rosh HaHakamim, chief of the sages. He was executed by the Romans in the aftermath of the Bar Kokhba revolt. He has also been described as a philosopher. Biography. Early years. Akiva ben Joseph, written in the Babylonian Talmud and in the Jerusalem Talmud, born c. 50 CE, was of humble parentage. According to some sources, he was descended from converts to Judaism. When Akiva married the daughter of Ben Kalbasagma, a wealthy citizen of Jerusalem, Akiva was an uneducated shepherd employed by him. The first name of Akiva's wife is not provided in earlier sources, but a later version of the tradition gives it as Rachel. She stood loyally by her husband during the period of his late initiation into rabbinic studies after he was 40 years of age, and in which Akiva dedicated himself to the study of Torah. A different tradition narrates that, at the age of 40, Akiva attended the academy of his native town, Lod, presided over by Eliezer ben Hyrcanus. Hyrcanus was a neighbor of Joseph, the father of Akiva. The fact that Eliezer was his first teacher, and the only one whom Akiva later designates as rabbi, is of importance in settling the date of Akiva's birth. These legends set the beginning of his years of study at about 75 AD. Besides Eliezer, Akiva studied under Joshua ben Hananiah and Nachamish Gamzu. According to the Jerusalem Talmud, Bar Joshua ordained Akiva as his fellow student, presumably with Seneca. Akiva was on equal footing with Gamaliel too, whom he later met. Rabbi Tarfon was considered as one of Akiva's masters, but the pupil outranked his teacher and he became one of Akiva's greatest admirers. Akiva remained in Lod as long as there, and then moved his own school for some time at Zifron, modern Zafran near Hamath. Marriage. According to the Talmud, Akiva was a shepherd for Ben Kalbasabu when the latter's daughter noticed his modesty and fine character traits. She offered to marry him if he would agree to begin studying Torah, as at the time he was 40 years old and illiterate. When her father found out she was secretly betrothed to an unlearned man, he was furious. He drove his daughter out of his house, swearing that he would never help her while Akiva remained her husband. Akiva and his wife lived in such poverty that they used straw for their bed. The Talmud relates that once Elisha the prophet assumed the guise of a poor man and came to their door to beg for some straw for a bed for his wife after she had given birth. When Akiva and his wife saw that there were people even poorer than they, Rachel said to him, "Go and become a scholar." By agreement with his wife, Akiva spent 12 years away from home, pursuing his studies. He would make a living by cutting wood from the forest, selling half for his wife's and children's well-being, and using the other half for keeping a fire burning at night to keep himself warm and to provide light thereby for his own studies. Returning at the end of 12 years accompanied by 12,000 disciples, at the point of entering his home he overheard his wife say to a neighbor who was critical of his long absence, "If I had my wish, he should stay another 12 years at the academy without crossing the threshold." Akiva went back to the academy. He returned 12 years later escorted by 24,000 disciples. When his wife went out to greet him, some of his students, not knowing who she was, sought to restrain her, but Akiva exclaimed, "Let her alone, for what is mine and yours is hers. She deserves the credit for our Torah study." Not knowing who he was, then Kalbasabu also approached Akiva and asked him for help in annulling his vow to disown his daughter and her husband. Akiva asked him, "Would you have made your vow if you had known that he would become a great scholar?" Then Kalbasabu replied, "Had I known that he would learn even one chapter or one single halakha." Akiva said to him, "I am that man." Then Kalbasabu fell at Akiva's feet and gave him half his wealth. According to another source, Akiva saw that at some future time he would take in marriage a wife of Turnus Rufus, his executioner, also known as Quintus Tinius Rufus, after she converted to Judaism, for which reason he spat on the ground, for having come from a fetid draught. Drop, smiled, at her conversion, and wept, at such beauty eventually rotting in the dust after death. The motive behind this marriage is not given. Later years. The greatest Tannaim of the middle of the 2nd century came from Akiva's school, notably Rabbi Meir, Judah bar Ilai, Simeon bar Yache, Jose ben Halakha, Eliezer ben Shamua, and Rabbi Nehemiah. Besides these, Akiva had many disciples whose names have not been handed down, but the Agadah variously gives their number as 12,000, 24,000, and 48,000. Akiva is reported to have had a rabbinic relationship with Rabbi Gamaliel dated as before their trip to Rome. Convinced of the necessity of a central authority for Judaism, Akiva became a devoted adherent and friend of Rabbi Gamaliel, who aimed at constituting the patriarch the true spiritual chief of the Jews. However, Akiva was just as firmly convinced that the power of the patriarch must be limited both by the written and the oral law, the interpretation of which lay in the hands of the learned, and he was accordingly brave enough to act in ritual matters in Rabbi Gamaliel's own house contrary to the decisions of Rabbi Gamaliel himself. Akiva filled the office of an overseer of the poor. Various rabbinic texts testify to his personal qualities, such as benevolence and kindness toward the sick and needy. In 95-96 AD, Akiva was in Rome, and sometime before 110 he was in Nicardia. During his travels, it is probable that he visited other places having important Jewish communities. Akiva allegedly took part in the Bar Kokhba revolt of 132-136, but his role here is not historically determined. The only established fact concerning Akiva's connection with Bar Kokhba is that he regarded Bar Kokhba as the promised Messiah. This is the only evidence of active participation by Akiva in the revolution. Some modern scholars argue that Akiva's thousands of students died fighting for Bar Kokhba, but this opinion was first formulated by Nachman Krochmal around 200 years ago and has no earlier source. Abireda states that Akiva suffered martyrdom on account of his transgression of Hadrian's edicts against the practice and the teaching of the Jewish religion, being sentenced to die by Turnus Rufus in Caesarea. As this story credits the execution to religious rather than political reasons, it may be evidence against Akiva's having a role in the revolt. Akiva's death occurred after several years of imprisonment, which places it at about 132, before the suppression of the Bar Kokhba revolution. Otherwise, the delay of the Romans in executing him would be quite inexplicable. That the religious interdicts of Hadrian preceded the overthrow of Bar Kokhba is shown by the Mekhilta. Jewish sources relate that he was subjected to combing, a Roman torture in which the victim's skin was flayed with iron combs. Death. The death of Akiva is usually rendered as some redacted form of 3 separate versions of the circumstances. Each version shares the same basic plot points. Akiva defies the Roman prohibition on teaching Torah. The consul Turnus Rufus orders his execution. Akiva is laid alive, and his final words are the Shema prayer. The most common version of Akiva's death is that the Roman government ordered him to stop teaching Torah, on pain of death, and that he refused. When Turnus Rufus, as he is called in Jewish sources, ordered Akiva's execution, Akiva is said to have recited his prayers calmly, though suffering agonies, and when Rufus asked him whether he was a sorcerer, since he felt no pain, Akiva replied, "I am no sorcerer, but I rejoice at the opportunity now given to me to love my God with all my life. Seeing that I have hitherto been able to love him only with all my means and with all my might," he began reciting the Shema, and with the word Echem, 1, he expired. The version in the Babylonian Talmud tells it as a response of Akiva to his students, who asked him how he could yet offer prayers to God. He says to them, "All my life I was worrying about the verse, with all your soul, and the sages expounded this to signify, even if he takes away your soul. And I said to myself, when will I ever be able to fulfill this command? And now that I am finally able to fulfill it, I should not." Then he said the Shema and he extended the final word Echem, 1, until his life expired with that word. A heavenly voice went out and announced, "Blessed are you, Rabbi Akiva, that your life expired with Echem." Another legend is that Elisha bore the body by night to Caesarea. The night, however, was as bright as the finest summer's day. When they arrived, Elisha and Joshua entered a cavern that contained a bed, table, chair, and lamp, and deposited Akiva's body there. No sooner had they left it than the cavern closed of its own accord, so that no one has found it since. Rebbe Akiva's modern-day tomb is located in Tiberias. Annually, on the night of Lag BaOmer, pilgrims light bonfires at the tomb of Rebbe Akiva. The pilgrims include some from Boston, Massachusetts, a tradition reinstated by the Bostoner Rebbe in 1983.
Going ahead and sometimes way that organization is makes sense to his workers. So مش بعد drink بعدين بخش I will settle up over the day and shop. That's a big word.
Religious and scholarly perspectives. Religious philosophy. A Tanaitic tradition mentions that of the 4 who delved into the Partis legend, Akiva was the only one who was able to properly absorb this wisdom, with the other 3 suffering various consequences as a result of the attempt. This serves at least to show how strong in later ages was the recollection of Akiva's philosophical speculation. As to the creation of man and his actions, Akiva would say, all things are foreseen, yet the freedom to choose is given, and the world is judged on merits, while everything is according to the preponderance of works. Mishnah, Avot 3:18. The relationship between God and man. Akiva's opinion about the very creation of man is recorded in Pirkei Avot. Akiva's ontology is based upon the principle that man.
He favored is man. How favored is man? For he who created after an image, the scripture says, for in an image God made man.
Man was created, that is. Akiva's opinion about the very creation of man is recorded in Pirkei Avot. Akiva's ontology is based upon the principle that man was created, that is, not in the image of God which would be but after an image, after a primordial type, or, philosophically speaking, after an idea what Philo calls in agreement with Judean theology, the first heavenly man, see Adam Admon, strict monotheist that Akiva was, he protested against angels, and declared the plain interpretation of his meaning like one of us to be arrant blasphemy. It is quite instructive to read how a Christian of Akiva's generation, Justin Warner, calls the literal interpretation thus objected to by Akiva a Jewish heretical one, in his earnest endeavors to insist as strongly as possible upon the incomparable nature of God. Akiva indeed lowers the angels somewhat to the realms of mortals, and, alluding to Psalm 78 hours, and 25 minutes, maintains that manna is the actual food of the angels. This view of Akiva's, in spite of the energetic protests of his colleague Rabbi Ishmael, became the one generally accepted by his contemporaries. From his views as to the relation between God and man, he deduces that a murderer is to be considered as committing the crime against the divine archetype of man. Similarly, he recognizes as the chief and greatest principle of Judaism the command, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. He does not, indeed, maintain thereby that the execution of this command is equivalent to the performance of the whole law, and in one of his polemic interpretations of scripture he protests strongly against a contrary opinion allegedly held by Christians and other non-Jews since the diaspora, according to which Judaism is at best simply morality for. In spite of his philosophy, Akiva was an extremely strict and national Jew. But he is far from representing strict justice as the only attribute of God, in agreement with the ancient Israel theology of the attribute of justice, and the attribute of mercy. He teaches that God combines goodness and mercy with strict justice. Hence his maxim, referred to above, God rules the world in mercy, but according to the preponderance of good or bad in human acts. Eschatology. As to the question concerning the frequent sufferings of the pious and the prosperity of the wicked, truly a burning one in Akiva's time, this is answered by the explanation that the pious are punished in this life for their few sins, so that in the next they may receive only reward, while the wicked obtain in this world all the recompense for the little good they have done, and in the next world will receive only punishment for their misdeeds. Consistent as Akiva always was, his ethics and his views of justice were only the strict consequences of his philosophical system. Justice as an attribute of God must also be exemplary for man. No mercy and justice is his basic principle in the doctrine concerning law, and he does not conceal his opinion that the action of the Jews in taking the spoil of the Egyptians is to be condemned. Biblical canon. Akiva was instrumental in drawing up the canon of the Tanakh. He protested strongly against the canonicity of certain of the Apocrypha, the wisdom of Sirach, for instance, in which passages is to be explained according to Kiddushin 49a, and according to its Aramaic equivalent, so that Akiva's utterance reads, he who reads aloud in the synagogue from books not belonging to the canon as if they were canonical, etc. But he was not opposed to a private reading of the Apocrypha, as is evident from the fact that he himself makes frequent use of Sirach. Akiva stoutly defended, however, the canonicity of the Song of Songs, and Esther. GRTZ's statements respecting Akiva's attitude toward the canonicity of the Song of Songs were viewed as misconceptions by I.H. Wise. Aquila, meanwhile, was a disciple of Akiva and, under Akiva's guidance, gave the Greek-speaking Jews a rabbinical Bible. Akiva probably also provided for a revised text of the Targums, certainly, for the essential base of the Targum Onkelos, which in matters of halakha reflects Akiva's opinions completely. Akiva is systematizer. Akiva worked in the domain of the halakha, both in the systematization of its traditional material and in its further development. The condition of the halakha, that is, of religious praxis, and indeed of Judaism in general, was a very precarious one at the turn of the 1st century of the Common Era. The lack of any systematized collection of the accumulated halakha rendered impossible any presentation of them in a form suitable for practical purposes. Means for the theoretical study of the halakha were also scant. Both logic and exegesis, the two props of the halakha, being differently conceived by the various rulings Tanaim, and differently taught, according to a tradition, which has historical confirmation. It was Akiva who systematized and arranged the Mishnah, the halakhic codex, the Midrash, the exegesis of the halakha, and the halakha, the logical amplification of the halakha. The Mishnah of Akiva, as his pupil Rabbi Meir had taken it from him, became the basis of the 6 orders of the Mishnah. The Mishnah of the one called Rabbi Akiva mentioned by Epiphanius, as well as the great Mishnayot of Akiva, are probably not to be understood as independent Mishnayot, existing at that time, but as the teachings and opinions of Akiva contained in the officially recognized Mishnayot and Midrashim. At the same time, it is fair to consider the Mishnah of Judah Hanasi, called simply the Mishnah, as well as the majority of all halakhic Midrashim now extant, as derived from the school of Akiva. According to Johanan Bar Napeh, 199-179, our Mishnah comes directly from Rabbi Meir, the Tosefta from our Nehemiah, the Sifra from our Judah, and the Sifrei from our Simon, but they all took Akiva for a model in their works and followed him. One recognizes here the threefold division of the halakhic material that emanated from Akiva. 1. The codified halakha, i.e. Mishnah. 2. The Tosefta, which in its original form contains a concise logical argument for the Mishnah, somewhat like the Levash of Mordecai Javon the Shulchan Aruch. 3. The halakhic Midrash. The following halakhic Midrashim originating in Akiva's school, the Megillah of Rabbi Shimon on Exodus, Sifra on Leviticus, Sifrei Zu on Numbers, and the Sifrei to Deuteronomy, the halakhic portion of which belongs to Akiva's school. What was Rabbi Akiva like? A worker who goes out with his basket. He finds wheat, he puts it in. Barley, he puts it in. Spelt, he puts it in. Beans, he puts it in. Lentils, he puts it in. When he arrives home, he sorts out the wheat by itself, barley by itself, spelt by itself, beans by themselves, lentils by themselves. So did Rabbi Akiva. He arranged the Torah rings by rings. Akiva's halakha. Akiva was responsible not only for systematization of the halakha, but also for hermeneutics and halakhic exegesis, which form the foundation of all Talmudic learning. The enormous difference between the halakha before and after Akiva may be briefly described as follows. The old halakha was, as its name indicates, the religious practice sanctioned as binding by tradition, to which were added extensions and, in some cases, limitations of the Torah, arrived at by strict logical deduction. The opposition offered by the Sadducees, which became especially strenuous in the 1st century BC, led to the development of the halakhic midrash, whose purpose was to deduce these amplifications of the law, by tradition and logic, out of the law itself.
It might be thought that with the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem, which event made an end of Sadduceeism, the halakhic midrash would also have disappeared, seeing that the halakha could now dispense with the midrash. This likely would have been the case had not Akiva created his own midrash, by means of which he was able to discover things that were even unknown to Moses. Akiva made the accumulated treasure of the oral law, which until his time was only a subject of knowledge, and not a science and inexhaustible mine from which, by the means he provided, new treasures might be continually extracted. If the older halakha is to be considered as the product of the internal struggle between Phariseeism and Sadduceeism, the halakha of Akiva has been viewed as the result of an external contest between Judaism on the one hand and Hellenism and Hellenistic Christianity on the other. Akiva no doubt perceived that the intellectual bond uniting the Jews, far from being allowed to disappear with the destruction of the Jewish state, must be made to draw them closer together than before. He pondered also the nature of that bond. The Bible could never again fill the place alone, for the Christians also regarded it as a divine revelation. Still less could dogmas serve the purpose, for dogmas were always repellent to rabbinical Judaism, whose very essence is development and the susceptibility to development. Mention has already been made of the fact that Akiva was the creator of a rabbinical Bible version elaborated with the aid of his pupil, Aquila, though this is traditionally debated, and designed to become the common property of all Jews. But this was not sufficient to obviate all threatening danger. It was to be feared that the Jews, by their facility in accommodating themselves to surrounding even then a marked characteristic, might become entangled in the net of Grecian philosophy, and even in that of Gnosticism. The example of his colleagues and friends, Elisha ben Abuiah, Ben Azai, and Ben Zoma, strengthened him still more in his conviction of the necessity of providing some counterpoise to the intellectual influence of the non-Jewish world. Akiva's hermeneutic system. Akiva sought to apply the system of isolation followed by the Pharisees, equals those who separate themselves to doctrine as they did to practice, to the intellectual life as they did to that of daily discourse, and he succeeded in furnishing a firm foundation for his system. As the fundamental principle of his system, Akiva enunciates his conviction that the mode of expression used by the Torah is quite different from that of every other book. In the language of the Torah, nothing is mere form, everything is essence. It has nothing superfluous, not a word, not a syllable, not even a letter. Every peculiarity of diction, every particle, every sign, is to be considered as of higher importance, as having a wider relation and as being of deeper meaning than it seems to have. Like Philo, who saw in the Hebrew construction of the infinitive with the finite form of the same verb and in certain particles, adverbs, prepositions, etc. some deep reference to philosophical and ethical doctrines. Akiva perceived in them indications of many important ceremonial laws, legal statutes, and ethical teachings. He thus gave the Jewish mind not only a new field for its own employment, but, convinced both of the immutability of Holy Scripture and of the necessity for development in Judaism, he succeeded in reconciling these two apparently hopeless opposites by means of his remarkable method. The following two illustrations will serve to make this clear.
The high conception of women's dignity, which Akiva shared in common with most other Pharisees, induced him to abolish the full custom that banished ritually impure women from all social communication. He succeeded, moreover, in fully justifying his interpretation of those scriptural passages upon which this ostracism could be incorrectly sourced. For him, a Jewish slave is a contradiction in terms, for every Jew is to be regarded as a prince. Akiva therefore teaches, in opposition to the competing halakha, that the sale of an underage daughter by her father conveys to her purchaser no legal title to marriage with her, but on the contrary carries with it the duty to keep this female slave until she is of age and then to marry her. How Akiva endeavors to substantiate this from the Hebrew text is shown.
His hermeneutics frequently put him at odds with the interpretation of his colleagues, as particularly demonstrated by his attitude toward the Samaritans. He considered friendly discussion with these potential converts as desirable on political as well as on religious grounds, and he permitted not only eating their bread, but also intermarriage, considering them as full converts. This is quite remarkable, seeing that in matrimonial legislation he went so far as to declare every forbidden betrothal is absolutely void and the offspring is illegitimate. For similar reasons, Akiva rules leniently in the biblical ordinance of Kiliam. Nearly every chapter in the treatise of that name contains a mitigation by Akiva. Love for the Holy Land, which he as a genuine nationalist frequently and warmly expressed, was so powerful with him that he would have exempted agriculture from much of the rigor of the law. These examples will suffice to justify the opinion that Akiva was the man to whom Judaism owes preeminently its activity and its capacity for further development in accordance with the tradition he received. Selected legends. In the Talmudic Sujaya, Rav Yehuda narrates the story when Moses sees Rabbi Akiva, Menachah 29b. In this legend, Moses ascended to heaven, or Mount Sinai, and saw God preoccupied with making ornamental crowns for the letters of the Torah. When Moses inquired what the purpose of these embellishments were, God explained that a man named Akiva would be born in several generations, and that he would be able to deduce a halakha from every little curve and crown of the letters of the law. Moses requested that he be allowed to see this man, and God assented. Moses found himself sitting in Akiva's study hall. As Moses listened to Akiva's lesson, he grew weary, because he could not understand it. However, when one of the students asked Akiva for the source of his teaching, Akiva replied that it was a law to Moses at Sinai, and Moses was put at ease. When Moses returns to God and asks what the pious Akiva's ultimate reward will be, he is shown the grisly aftermath of Akiva's execution. Horrified, Moses demands God explain his actions, at which point God commands Moses to be silent and respect his judgment. According to Louis Ginsburg, this story gives in not that style a picture of Akiva's activity as the father of Talmudical Judaism. Tinius Rufus asked, commands. Akiva replied, on nature of God's command supplies us only with the raw material. Human skill enables us to elaborate the same according to the requirements of art and good taste. Rufus had hoped to drive Akiva into a corner by his strange question, for he expected quite a different answer and intended to compel Akiva to admit the wickedness of circumcision. He then put the question, why has God not made man just as he wanted him to be? Akiva had an answer ready, for the very reason, man must perfect himself. The Agadah explains how Akiva, in the prime of life, commenced his rabbinical studies. Legendary allusion to this change in Akiva's life is made in two slightly varying forms. Likely the older of the two goes as follows. Akiva, noticing a stone at a well that had been hollowed out by drippings from the buckets, said, if these drippings can, by continuous action, penetrate this solid stone, how much more can the persistent word of God penetrate the pliant, fleshly human heart, if that word but be presented with patient insistency. Akiva taught thousands of students. On one occasion, 24,000 students of his died in a plague. His 5 main students were Judah bar Ilai, Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Eliezer ben Shamla, Jose ben Halachah, and Shimon bar Yache.
Once he was called upon to decide between a dark-skinned king and the king's wife, the wife having been accused of infidelity after bearing a white child, Akiva ascertained that the royal chamber was adorned with white marble statuary, and, based on the theory that a child is similar in nature to whatever its parents gazed upon while conceiving the child, he exonerated the queen from suspicion. It is related that, during his stay in Rome, Akiva became intimately acquainted with the Jewish proselyte Kisha bar Shalom, a very influential Roman, according to some scholars identical with Flavius Clemens, Domitian's nephew, who, before his execution for pleading the cause of the Jews, bequeathed to Akiva all his possessions. The Talmud enumerates 6 occasions in which Akiva gained wealth. In one case, his success as a teacher led his wealthy father-in-law Kalva Savo to acknowledge such a distinguished son-in-law and to support him. Another source of his wealth was said to be a large sum of money borrowed from a heathen woman, a matrona, as bondsman for the loan. Akiva named God in the sea, on the shore of which the matrona's house stood. Akiva, being sick, could not return the money at the time appointed, but his bondsman did not leave him in the lurch. An imperial princess suddenly became insane, in which condition she threw a chest containing imperial treasures into the sea. It was cast upon the shore close to the house of Akiva's creditor, so that when the matrona went to the shore to demand of the sea the amount she had lent Akiva, the ebbing tide left boundless riches at her feet. Later, when Akiva arrived to discharge his indebtedness, the matrona not only refused to accept the money, but insisted upon Akiva's receiving a large share of what the sea had brought to her. This was not the only occasion on which Akiva was made to feel the truth of his favorite maxim: whatever God does, he does for the best. Once, being unable to find any sleeping accommodation in a certain city, he was compelled to pass the night outside its walls. Without a murmur he resigned himself to this hardship, and even when a lion devoured his donkey, and a cat killed the rooster whose crowing was to herald the dawn to him, and the wind extinguished his candle, the only remark he made was, all that God does is for the good. When morning dawned he learned how true his words were. A band of robbers had fallen upon the city and carried its inhabitants into captivity, but he had escaped because his abiding place had not been noticed in the darkness, and neither beast nor fowl had betrayed him. Another legend according to which the gates of the infernal regions open for Akiva is analogous to the more familiar tale that he entered paradise and was allowed to leave it unscathed. There exists the following tradition. Akiva once met a cold black man carrying a heavy load of wood and running with the speed of a horse. Akiva stopped him and inquired, my son, why do you work so hard? If you are a slave and have a harsh master, I will buy you from him. If it be out of poverty that you do this, I will take care of your needs. It is for neither of these. The man replied, I am indebted and compelled because of my great sins to build my funeral pyre every day. In life, I was a tax gatherer and oppressed the poor. Let me go at once, lest the demon tortures me for my delay. Is there no help for you? Asked Akiva. Almost none, replied the deceased, for I understand that my sufferings will end only when I have a pious son. When I died, my wife was pregnant, but I have little hope that she will give my child proper training. Akiva inquired about the man's name and that of his wife and her dwelling place. When, in the course of his travels, he reached the place, Akiva sought information concerning the man's family. The neighbors very freely expressed their opinion that the deceased and his wife deserved to inhabit the infernal regions for all time, the latter because she had not even performed brit milah for the child. Akiva, however, was not to be turned from his purpose. He sought the son of the tax gatherer and labored long and assiduously in teaching him the word of God. After fasting for 40 days and praying to God to bless his efforts, he heard a heavenly voice, that call, asking, why do you go to so much trouble on behalf of this person? Because he is just the kind to work for, was the prompt answer. Akiva persevered until his pupil was able to officiate as a reader in the synagogue, and when there for the first time he recited the prayer, bless the Lord, the Father suddenly appeared to Akiva and overwhelmed him with thanks for his deliverance from the pains of hell through the merit of his son. This legend has been somewhat elaborately treated in Yiddish. Another version of this story exists in which Johanan ben Zakkai's name is given in place of Akiva. In popular culture, historical novels available in English which feature Akiva as a main character include. According to Barry W. Bolts, it is no accident that Akiva has inspired works of fiction not only because of his importance in Jewish religious history, but also because of the simple fact that so many of the details of his life are unknown and therefore grist for the mill of a novelist.
Akiva, German by Marcus Lehmann, 1880, translated into Hebrew, Rothblum, 1896, and English, Schaefer, 1923, Left Witch, 1956, Zucker, 2003, The Son of a Star, by Benjamin Ward Richardson, 1888, Festival at Morone, by Harry Sackler, 1935, As a Driven Leaf, by Milton Steinberg, 1939, The Last Revolt, Yiddish, by Joseph Opatoshu, translated into Hebrew by Nidra, 1940, and English by Eagle, 1952. Prince of Israel by Elias Gilner, 1950. The Soldier of the Sage by Richard Gibson Hubler, 1966. Son of a Star by Andrew Meisel's, 1969. If I Forget Thee by Brenda L. Segal, 1985. Four Who Entered Paradise by Howard Schwartz, 1995. My Husband Bar Kokhba by Andrew Sanders, 2003. The Orchard, Hebrew by Yochai Brandes, and translated into English by Daniel Liebenson. Is he one of your favorites? Yeah, I should know more about him, but he is one of my favorites. So he was born in Lod, and he died in Caesarea.
You only have to consecrate, or you only can consecrate that which you own. You can't consciously say that doesn't belong to you. We so often forget that God only expects of us what we're able to do. He doesn't expect to do what someone else can do. He doesn't expect to be someone else's accomplishments. What he does expect to do is to take a personalistic insight about all the spiritual tools that I possess. Be honest about what I possess.
50s Common Era. The 20th of September, 1:35. He's buried in Tiberias. Well, that's a cool story. Psych bitch. Shimon Bar Yochai. We heard this.
Shimon Bar Yochai, Zaharik Aramaean, Ilan Bar Yochai, or Shimon ben Yochai, Mishnah in Hebrew, also known by the acronym Rashbi, was a 2nd century Tana or sage of the period of Roman Judea and early Syrian Palestina. He was one of the most eminent disciples of Rabbi Akiva. The Zohar, a 13th century foundational work of Kabbalah, is ascribed to him by Kabbalistic tradition, but this claim is universally rejected by modern scholars.
Born 9 in Galilee, died 160. Buried at Kever Rashbi, Rome, Israel. Children Eliezer ben Simeon. But don't forget, he did have a child, a daughter at least, because they talk about his son-in-law.
Scholars. In addition,
and religious life, Judaism, Yurtzeit, Lag BaOmer, Halua of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai.
Addition, the essential legal works called the Sefer and Mekilta of Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai are attributed to him, not to be confused with the Mekilta of Rabbi Ishmael, of which much of the text is the same. In the Mishnah, where he is the fourth most mentioned sage, he is referred to as simply Rabbi Shimon except in Haggah 1:7. In Beredas, Midrash, and Gemara, his name occurs either as Shimon or Shimon ben Yochai. An 8th century pseudonymous attribution of divine revelations to Shimon by the angel Metatron is also known, called the Secrets of Rabbi Simon ben Yochai. According to modern legend, he and his son, Eliezer ben Simeon, were noted Kabbalists. Both figures are held in unique reverence by Kabbalistic tradition. According to another modern legend, they were buried in the same tomb in Meron, Israel, which is visited by thousands year-round. Biography. Shimon was born in the Galilee. He was one of the principal pupils of Rabbi Akiva, under whom he studied 13 years at Bnei Brak. Rabbi 28 relates that Shimon had previously studied at Jihad, under Gamaliel II and Joshua ben Benaiah, and that he was the cause of the infamous quarrel that broke out between these two leaders. However, this statement is somewhat chronologically difficult, considering that about 45 years later, when Akiva was thrown into prison, Shimon's father was still alive. Zacharias Frankel has concluded the account in Rabbi 28 as spurious. In the Jerusalem Talmud, in Terumah 46b and Sanhedrin 119a, Shimon's acuteness was tested and recognized by Akiva when he first came to him. Of all his pupils, Akiva ordained only Rabbi Meir and Shimon. Conscious of his merit, Shimon felt hurt at being ranked after Meir, and Akiva was compelled to soothe him with soft words. During Akiva's lifetime, Shimon was occasionally found at Sidon, where he seems to have shown great independence in his halakhic decisions. The following incident is recorded, illustrating his within piety. A man and his wife, childless despite 10 years of marriage, appeared before Shimon at Sidon to secure a divorce. Observing that they loved each other and not being able to refuse a request that agreed with rabbinical law, Shimon told them that as a feast marked their wedding, they should mark their separation in the same way. The result was that both changed their minds and, owing to Shimon's prayer, God granted them a child. Shimon often returned to Akiva, and once he conveyed a message to him from his fellow pupil Hanina ben Hakane. Shimon's love for his great teacher was profound. When Akiva was
Dude, we're starting over. I wasn't paying attention.
Shimon was born in the Galilee. He was one of the principal pupils of Rabbi Akiva, under whom he studied 13 years at Bnei Brak. Rabbi 28 relates that Shimon had previously studied at Jihad, under Gamaliel II and Joshua ben Benaiah, and that he was the cause of the infamous quarrel that broke out between these two leaders. However, this statement is somewhat chronologically difficult, considering that about 45 years later, when Akiva was thrown into prison, Shimon's father was still alive. Zacharias Frankel thus concluded the account in Rabbi 28 as spurious. In the Jerusalem Talmud, in Terumah 46b and Sanhedrin 1:19a, Shimon's acuteness was tested and recognized by Akiva when he first came to him. Of all his pupils, Akiva ordained only Rabbi Meir and Shimon. Conscious of his merit, Shimon felt hurt at being ranked after Meir, and Akiva was compelled to soothe him with soft words. During Akiva's lifetime, Shimon was occasionally found at Sidon, where he seems to have shown great independence in his halakhic decisions. The following incident is recorded, illustrating his within piety. A man and his wife, childless despite 10 years of marriage, appeared before Shimon at Sidon to secure a divorce. Observing that they loved each other and not being able to refuse a request that agreed with rabbinical law, Shimon told them that as a feast marked their wedding, they should mark their separation in the same way. The result was that both changed their minds and, owing to Shimon's prayer, God granted them a child. Shimon often returned to Akiva, and once he conveyed a message to him from his fellow pupil Hanina ben Hakane. Shimon's love for his great teacher was profound. When Akiva was thrown into prison by Hadrian, Shimon, probably through the influence of his father, who was in favor of the court of Rome, found a way to enter the prison. He still insisted upon Akiva's teaching him, and when the latter refused, Shimon jestingly threatened to tell his father, Yochai, who would cause Akiva to be punished more severely. After Akiva's death, Shimon was again ordained, with 4 other pupils of Akiva, by Judah ben Baba. Legends of persecution and hiding. The persecution of the Jews under Hadrian inspired Shimon with a different opinion of the Romans than that held by his father. Shimon often demonstrated his anti-Roman feeling when, at a meeting between Shimon and his former fellow pupils at Yusha, probably about a year and a half after Akiva's death, c. 126, Judah Bar Ilai spoke in praise of the Roman government. Shimon replied that the institutions which seemed so praiseworthy to Judah were for the benefit of the Romans only, to facilitate the carrying out of their wicked designs. Shimon's words were carried by Judah B. Jaron, one of his pupils, to the Roman governor, who sentenced Shimon to death. According to GRTC, this governor was Varus, who ruled under Antoninus Pius, and the event took place about 161. Shimon was compelled to seek refuge in a cavern, where he remained for 13 years till the emperor, possibly Antoninus Pius, who reigned until 161, died. Shimon, accompanied by his son Eliezer, hid in a cavern near Gadara, where they stayed for 13 years, living on dates and carrot fruit. Their whole bodies thus became covered with eruptions. One day, seeing that a bird had repeatedly escaped the net set for it by a hunter, Shimon and his son were encouraged to leave the cavern, taking the escape of the bird as an omen that God would not forsake them. When outside the cavern, they heard the voice of God say, "You are free." They accordingly went their way. Shimon then bathed in the warm springs of Tiberias, which rid him of the disease contracted in the cavern, and he showed his gratitude to the town in the following manner. Tiberias had been built by Herod Antipas on a site where there were many tombs, the exact locations of which had been lost. The town, therefore, had been regarded as unclean. Resolving to remove the cause of the uncleanness, Shimon planted lupins in all suspected places, wherever they did not take root. He knew that a tomb was underneath. The bodies were then exhumed and removed, and the town pronounced clean. A certain Samaritan secretly replaced one of the bodies to annoy and discredit Shimon. But Shimon learned what the Samaritan had done through the power of the Holy Spirit and said, "Let what is above go down, and what is below come up." The Samaritan was entombed, and the schoolmaster of Magdala, who mocked Shimon for his declaration, was turned into a heap of bones. To spare their garments, they sat naked in the sand, consequently covering their skin with scabs. At the end of 12 years, the prophet Elisha announced to them the death of the Roman emperor and the consequent annulment of the sentence of death against them. When they came forth, Shimon observed people occupied with agricultural pursuits to neglect the Torah and, being angered thereby, smote them with his glances. The voice of God then ordered him to return to the cavern, where he and Eliezer remained 12 months longer, at the end of which time God ordered them to come forth. When they did so, Shimon was met by his son-in-law Phinehas Ben-Cher, who wept at seeing him in such a miserable state. However, Shimon told him that he ought to rejoice, for during the 13 years' stay in the cavern, his knowledge of the Torah had been much increased. In gratitude for the miracle that had been wrought for him, Shimon then undertook the purification of Tiberias. He threw some lupins into the ground, whereupon the bodies came to the surface at various places, then marked as tombs. Not only was the man who mocked at Shimon's announcement of the purification of Tiberias turned into a heap of bones, but also Shimon's pupil and delator, Judah B. Jared. Later stories. It appears that Shimon settled afterward at Meron, the valley in front of which place was filled with dinars at Shimon's command. On the other hand, it is said that Shimon established a flourishing school at Tekoa, among the pupils of which was Judah Igrtz demonstrated that this Tekoa evidently was in Galilee, and hence must not be identified with the biblical Tekoa, which was in the territory of Judah. Bacher argues that Tekoa and Meron were the same place. As the last significant event in Shimon's life, it is said that he was sent to Rome, accompanied by Eliezer ben Jose, with a petition to the emperor for the abolition of the decree against the 3 Jewish observances and that his mission was successful. It is stated that Shimon was chosen for this mission because he was known as a man in whose favor miracles often were wrought. At Rome, too, Shimon's success was due to a miracle, for while on the way he was met by the demon Ben-Timalion, who offered his assistance. According to agreement, the demon entered the emperor's daughter, and Shimon exorcised it when he arrived at the Roman court. The emperor then took Shimon into his treasure house, leaving him to choose his own reward. Shimon found there the vexatious decree, which he took away and tore into pieces. This legend, the origin of which is non-Jewish, has been discussed by modern scholars. Israel LB thinks it is a variation of the legend of the apostle Bartholomew exorcising a demon that had taken possession of the daughter of Polinius, the king of India. Israel LB's opinion was approved by Joseph Halby. Bacher thinks there is another Christian legend which corresponds more closely to the Talmudic narrative, that in which Perseus exorcised a demon from Lucilla, the daughter of Marcus Aurelius. Shimon is stated to have said that whatever might be the number of persons deserving to enter heaven, he and his son were certainly of that number, so that if there were only 2, these were himself and his son. He is also credited with saying that, united with his son and Jotham, king of Judah, he would be able to absolve the world from judgment. Thus, on account of his exceptional piety and continual study of the law, Shimon was considered as one of those whose merit preserves the world, and therefore during his life the rainbow was never seen, that promise of God's forbearance not being needed. Teachings. The fullest account of Shimon's teachings is to be found in W. Bacher's Agadah Tanatin. When the Talmud attributes a teaching to Shimon without specifying which Shimon is meant, it means Shimon bar Yache. Halacha. Shimon's halakha are very numerous. They appear in every tractate of the Talmud except the Rakha, Hala, Tanit, Nedarim, Tumit, and Midat. He greatly valued the teaching of his master Akiva, and he is reported to have recommended his pupils to follow his own system of interpretation, Midat, because it was derived from that of Akiva. But this itself shows that Shimon did not follow his teacher in every point. Indeed, as is shown below, he often differed from Akiva, declaring his own interpretations to be the better. He was independent in his halakhic decisions, and did not refrain from criticizing the Tanaim of the preceding generations. He and Hosea ben Halakha were generally of the same opinion, but sometimes Shimon sided with Meir, like the other pupils of Akiva, who, wishing to perpetuate the latter's teaching, systematized it in the foundation of the Mishnah, Meir, Tosefta, Nehemiah, and Sifra, Judah. Shimon is credited with the authorship of the Sifrei, a halakhic midrash to Numbers and Deuteronomy, and of the Mikil to Rabbi Shimon, a similar midrash to Exodus. The particular characteristic of Shimon's teaching was that whether in a halakha or in a Haggadic interpretation of a biblical command, he endeavored to find the underlying reason for it. This often resulted in a material modification of the command in question. From many instances the following may be taken. In the prohibition against taking a widow's garment in pledge, it was Judah ben Ilay's opinion that no difference is to be made between a rich and a poor widow, but Shimon gives the reason for such a prohibition, which was that if such a pledge were taken it would be necessary to return it every evening, and going to the widow's home every morning and evening might compromise her reputation. Consequently, he declares, the prohibition applies only in the case of a poor widow, since one who is rich would not need to have the garment returned in the evening. Shimon's name was widely identified with this halakhic principle of interpretation, and his teacher Akiva approved of it. Therefore, his contemporaries often applied to him when they wished to know the reason for certain halakha. Shimon also divided the oral law into number groups, of which 15 are preserved in the Talmud. He especially favored the system of giving general rules, of which there are a great number. All this shows that he was systematic, and that he had the power of expressing himself clearly. He was dogmatic in his halakhic decisions, but where there was a doubt as to which of 2 courses should be followed, and the rabbis adopted a compromise, he admitted the legality of either course. He differed from Akiva in that he did not think that particles like that, gam, and others contain in themselves indications of halakha. But in many instances he showed that he was opposed to Ishmael's opinion that the Torah speaks as men do, and that seemingly pleonastic words can never serve as the basis for deducing new laws.
Legends.
Shimon is very prominent also in Agadah, and his utterances are numerous in both Talmuds. Many of his sayings bear on Torah study, which he believed should be the main object of man's life. Despite the stress he laid on the importance of prayer, and particularly on the reading of the Shema, he declared that one must not for the sake of either interrupt the study of the Torah. He considers the Torah one of the 3 good gifts which God gave to Israel and which cannot be preserved without suffering. But recognizing the difficulty of occupying oneself with Torah study and of providing a livelihood at the same time, Shimon said that the Torah was given only for those who ate the manna or the priestly meals. He declared that had he been on Mount Sinai when God delivered the Torah to Israel, he would have requested 2 mouths for man, one to be used exclusively as a means for repeating and thus learning the Torah. But then he added, how great also would be the evil done by delators with 2 mouths. Among Shimon's many other utterances may be mentioned those with regard to repentance, and some of his ethical sayings. So great is the power of repentance that a man who has been during his lifetime very wicked, if he repent toward the end, is considered a perfectly righteous man. He was particularly severe against haughtiness, which, he declared, is like idolatry, and against publicly shaming one's neighbor. One should rather throw himself into a burning furnace than shame a neighbor in public. He denounced the crimes of usury, deceitful dealing, and disturbing domestic peace. His animosity toward the Gentiles generally and toward feminine superstition is expressed in the following utterance. The best of the heathen merits death. The best of serpents should have its head crushed. And the most pious of women is prone to sorcery, although often quoted by anti-Semites. His comment was uttered after witnessing his teacher being tortured to death. Bar Yache himself becoming a fugitive after speaking out against Roman oppression. His hostility to the Romans is expressed also in his maxims. Thus, alluding probably to the Parthian War which broke out in the time of Antoninus Pius, he said, "If you see a Persian horse tied to Israel, look for the steps of the Messiah." Mysticism. 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 Shimon combined with his rationalism and halakha mysticism in his agadic teachings, as well as in his practice. He spoke of the magic sword, on which the name was inscribed, being given by God to Moses on Sinai, and he ascribed all kinds of miraculous powers to Moses. After his death he appeared to the saints in their visions. Thus his name became connected with mystic lore, and he became a chief authority for the Kabbalists. There exist two apocryphal midrashim ascribed to Shimon, the secrets of Rabbi Simon ben Yohai and Tifillat Shimon b Yohai. Both of them bear on the Messianic time, but the second is more complete. The main point of these midrashim is that while Shimon was hidden in the cavern, he fasted 40 days and prayed to God to rescue Israel from such persecutions. Then Metatron revealed to him the future, announcing the various Muslim rulers, the last one of whom would perish at the hands of the Messiah. As in similar Messianic apocrypha, the chief characters are Armilus and the three Messiahs, Messiah b Joseph, Ephraim, Messiah b Aaron, and Messiah b David, as evidenced in Dead Sea Scrolls. The Zohar, a 13th century foundational work of Kabbalah, is ascribed to him by Kabbalistic tradition, but this claim is universally rejected by modern scholars. Commemoration. Some believe that Bar Yache died on the 33rd day of the Omer, known as Lag BaOmer, due to a printing error in Kayim Vitals 3 and Sadash. Some believe that on the day of his death, he revealed deep Kabbalistic secrets which formed the basis of the Zohar. According to the Bnei Yisachar, on the day of his death, Bar Yache said, "Now it is my desire to reveal secrets. The day will not go to its place like any other, for this entire day stands within my domain." Daylight was miraculously extended until he had completed his final teaching and died. His yard side is widely known as a Yom Hillula, a day of celebration. This is based on the original text of Shardal Cabinet by Hayim Bible, which refers to the day as Yom Simchado, the day of his happiness, rather than Yom Shemet, the day that he died. There is thus a very widely observed custom to celebrate on Lag BaOmer at his burial place in Meron, with bonfires, torches, song and feasting. The Yom Hillula is celebrated by hundreds of thousands of people. Some say that the bonfires are lit to symbolize the impact of his teachings. Commemoration customs at the tomb. Customs at the tomb include the lighting of the bonfire that traditionally goes to the Reds of the Boyaner dynasty. Boys at the age of 3 will often come to the tomb to receive their first haircut. Another custom at the tomb of Shimon Bar Yache is the giving of Rotel, Hebrew. The Hebrew letters Chet and Yod are the gematria, numerical equivalent of 18. Rotel is a liquid measure of about 3 liters. Thus, 18 rottles equals 54 liters or about 13 gallons. It is popularly believed that if one donates or offers 18 rottles of liquid refreshment, grape juice, wine, soda or even water, to those attending the celebrations at Bar Yache's tomb on Lag BaOmer, then the giver will be granted miraculous salvation. See also.
So therefore, again, no liability. Okay, now contracts are the
All right, that's tight. Are we done? Now, what are we gonna learn today? I don't know. No debates. Yo, dog. When Rambam and said like the Lubavitcher Rebbe and the Vilna Gaon awoke in the morning, how did their days look? Like their practices, like they awake, and it said like you get up right away because it's like you're standing in front of a king, or you wouldn't sleep in front of a king, though some people might because that's like comfortable. And then also, what about their sleeping routines? Like right before they go to bed, they say Shema. I know like Rambam like slept on his left side, but that's usually not good for the heart. Give me that breakdown, please. Got you. Let's do a clean, grounded, and real. No legends as facts, but also not stripping the soul out of it. I'll be breaking into morning, daytime posture, and night sleep, and I'll flag what's halakha, musar, and personal stringency. Waking up, standing before a king. Source Shulchan Aruch, Orach Chaim 1:1. A person should strengthen himself like a lion to get up in the morning to serve his creator. The line is why people say, you don't lie around if you're standing before a king. What that actually meant in practice. Vilna Gaon woke up very early, often before dawn, got up immediately, no lounging, no drama, no theatrics, just discipline, was obsessed with not wasting time, not with mystical vibes. For him, getting up fast equals respect for time, not emotional hype. Lubavitcher Rebbe also rose early, but emphasized calm focus, not panic. Very orderly, washing hands, blessings, prayer, and intention. Didn't promote guilt for being human, promoted direction. Rambam Ahmadi's framed this medically and psychologically. Sleep and waking were about health, not ascetic heroics. No mystical king imagery. More order your body so your mind can know God. First moments, what they actually did. Immediately upon waking, morani, gratitude before even washing hands. This is pure consciousness, not ritual. Nedilat yadayim, washing hands, removes spiritual static. Ruach ra'ah in rabbinical language. No jumping straight into Torah without grounding. Important. None of them taught dissociation, or ignoring the body. Daytime posture, how they held themselves. No casual slouching during prayer. No sitting otherwise. Normal sitting otherwise. The standing before a king idea applies mainly to prayer, Torah study, moral decision making. It does not mean walking around tense all day, never resting, pretending you're not a human. That's a modern distortion. Night and sleep. This is where people get weird. I agree. Before sleep, common to all three traditions: Kriyat Shema al Hamida, short self review of the day, forgiving others, letting go of anger. Let clear the conscious to sleep isn't clear the conscious so sleep isn't fractured. How did they sleep? Rambam very clear on this. Sleep is medicine, 6 to 8 hours depending on the person. Best sleep on the side, not flat on the back or stomach, slightly elevated head. Early night sleep is better than late night sleep. He explicitly says a sage who ruins his health is not holy, he's ignorant. Which side? Early night, right side, later in the night, left side. Oh fuck. Okay, this is actually medical, not mystical. Helps digestion, reduces heart strain, matches circadian digestion cycles. So yeah, Rambam sleeping on his side is good for the heart, not bad. Vilna Gaon slept very little, but this was personal capacity, not a recommendation. He warned others not to imitate him. Lubavitcher Rebbe slept less than average, very structured, never promoted sleep deprivation as a value. What they didn't teach, important, they didn't teach guilt for needing sleep, anxiety based piety, ignoring health. If you're exhausted, you're not holy. That stuff comes later, mostly from bad mashpia culture. The core idea, this is the key. What Chazal says, you are standing before a king. They mean awareness, not fear, dignity, not tension, presence, not perfection. The king metaphor is not about drifting, not is about not drifting. The king metaphor is about not drifting, not about acting like a monk. Too long didn't read. But actually accurate. Wake up with intention, not panic. Don't waste time, but don't hate your body. Sleep is holy if it enables clarity. Side sleeping is optimal. Health is part of serving God. You're not meant to cosplay the Vilna Gaon. All right, I mean that's cool. I'm cool with that, but um, that's cool. Can you give me a breakdown though? I think like, can you give me a rundown of Rambam? Like he says, I thought it was asleep on the side, but I thought it was the left side. Like, give me like process by process. Like they take out their clothes, just for Rambam. He takes off his clothes and like, would he have sex and then just fall asleep? Does he clean himself up? Like, how does that work? It's a good fucking question. Rebbe's in bed. It's a good fucking question. I know. Got it. You're asking very practically, not pornographically, about Rambam. Actually, does address this in a clean medical halakhic way. I'll keep it clinical, source, and precise, no graphic stuff. I'll only talk about Rambam, not folklore. Rambam's important for Rambam. Sex, sleep, hygiene, clothing, digestion are all medical acts. Holiness is equal to order and health. There is zero ascetic shame, but also zero indulgence. He writes about this mainly in Mishnah Torah, Hilchot Deot, Hilchot Ishuri Bia, his medical writings, regimen of health. Sleep position, you are half right. Rambam's exact guidance: do not sleep on your back, do not sleep on your stomach, sleep on your side. Then he specifies timing: early in the night, right side; later in the night, left side. Why pure medicine? Right side digestion, left side later. Heart not compressed. That doesn't make sense. Lungs freer. This is recommended by modern sleep medicine. Suggest side sleeping. Left side is good, especially later in the night. But isn't that sleeping on your left? You do remember correctly, just missing the time. Or are they saying that? I don't know. Clothing and bed prep, very Rambam. Rambam is big on clean body, clean clothes, clean bed before sleep. Remove daytime clothes. Wear dedicated garments. Body should be washed regularly, especially if sweat or intimacy occurred. This is health, not ritual purity. Sex then sleeps. Clinical, not graphic. Rambam is extremely clear and very non-mystical. After marital relations, clean the body. Urinate if needed. There you go. Spraying up the pipes. Wipe and wash. Basic hygiene. Do not fall asleep sweaty or unclean. Why? Prevents illness, prevents irritation, prevents lethargy. Lethargy preserves clarity of mind. He treats this like eating and washing your hands, unhealthy and sinful. Timing of sex and sleep. Rambam says, best time middle of the night. All right, dog. Not immediately after eating, not when exhausted, not when ill, not excessively frequent. Afterward, calm down, let breathing normalize, then sleep. Again, medical moderation. Spiritual side, still Rambam, not Kabbalah. Before sleep, clear your mind, no anger, no obsession, no overstimulation. Sleep should come from settledness, not collapse. What Rambam does not say, he does not say don't enjoy sex. Sleep deprivation is holy. Dirtiness is spiritual. Ignore the body. Fall asleep whenever you drop. Those ideas come later, not Rambam. Rambam's bottom line, this is the thesis. A healthy body enables a knowing mind. A knowing mind is how you serve God. So clean up, sleep on your side, be moderate, respect the body. Don't miss vibe. That's Rambam. Yo, dog, how did a Rebbe have sex? In a very serious way. Like, was the lady on the bottom and he was on top, Gittel, and like, what was his sleeping habit? And was he still doing it like when he got older? Is that good? Rebbiton went back. That's a good fucking question, kid. I know. I can't go into explicit sexual position or graphic details. What I can give you cleanly and accurately is Rambam serious. Oh, not Rambam. No. Rebbe. No, Rebbe. Oh, we'll do Rambam first. Good question. Okay, what I can give you accurately is Rambam's not explicit for marital intimacy, aging, and sleep, which is actually what he cared about. Rambam's view of sex serious, not clinical. Serious, clinical, not erratic. Rambam's sex is permitted and good within marriage, health oriented, not mystical, modest, private, and dignified, governed by consent and moderation. He explicitly rejects aesthetic shame, indulgence for its own sake, treating sex as dirty or magical. How sex was meant to happen, non explicit, Rambam accurate. Rambam does not describe position. That silence is intentional. What he does emphasize mutual willingness and emotional readiness, privacy and modesty, no exposure to others, no crude speech, calm environment, physical cleanliness before and after, no rushing directly from eating or exhaustion, no using sex to numb stress or anger. The act is treated like eating, necessary, potentially pleasurable, but not a performance or spectacle. Frequency and age. This answers your older question. Rambam is very clear. Frequency depends on health, age, and strength. As a person ages, frequency naturally decreases. This is normal and correct. Continuing intimacy in older age is fine if health allows. Forcing it when weak or ill is harmful, not holy. This is not expectation that an earlier stage behaves like a young. There is no expectation that an elderly stage behaves like a man. After sex equals sleep, or after sex then sleep. Rambam again, after marital relations, clean the body, basic hygiene, calm the breath. Do not fall asleep overheated or agitated. Then sleep on the side as previously discussed. This is medical advice, not ritual. Rambam's core principle. This is the key. Anything that weakens the body weakens the soul's ability to know God. So sex is good when it strengthens life, bad when it depletes or dominates, neutral when treated casually, holy when ordered wisely. What Rambam deliberately avoids, he avoids explicit descriptions, fetishizing how sages did it, turning private acts into public curiosity. That restraint is part of his ethic. Bottom line, Rambam lived a disciplined, embodied adult life. He had marital intimacy. He adjusted with age. He prioritized health and dignity. He slept intentionally. He did not mythologize or dramatize sex. If you no, how about the Rebbe? Got an answer about the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, in a serious, not explicit, historically responsible way. Anything beyond that would cross into speculation of voyeurism, which he himself would have rejected. The Lubavitcher Rebbe, how he approached intimacy, sleep, and the body. First, an important boundary. Unlike Rambam, who wrote medical manuals, the Rebbe did not write about his own private life. Yeah, he didn't fucking stream it either, bitch. In Chabad culture, especially privacy and marital matters is sacred, so we rely on his public teaching, his halakhic guidance to others, credible testimony about his daily discipline, not gossip, not mechanics. But boy, I bet Gittel would have a lot to say about this bitch. Marital intimacy, Gittel? No, no. That's Meyer Amschel. Uh, this would just be the Rebbitzin, but the Rebbitzins, a different bitch, a different person. Marital intimacy. What can we say accurately? Accurately, the Rebbe taught that marital intimacy is a mitzvah, not a concession, an act of connection, dignity, and responsibility, governed by halakha and tzniut, modesty, never something to be discussed publicly in detail. He strongly opposed ascetic denial of marital life, treating sex as crude, mechanical, or indulgent curiosity about how Zadokim did it. His consistent marriage. What matters is Kedusha, sanctity, not technique. Technique is pretty important, big dog. He emphasized shalom bayit, emotional harmony, and consideration of health, stress, and age. As people age, intimacy should continue if mutually desired, adjust naturally, never be forced, never be guilt driven. That is fully aligned with Rambam, just framed spiritually rather than medically. Sleep habits. This we actually know about. It is part. This part is well documented. The Rebbe slept very little, often just a few hours. His sleep was highly structured. He often slept in short segments. He did this because of enormous workload, personal capacity. He explicitly told others, "Do not to imitate." He imitated him. This is critical. He said repeatedly, "A person who weakens their health cannot serve God properly." So his sleep pattern was personal, not prescriptive. Cleanliness and order. The Rebbe was meticulous about cleanliness, proper dress, physical dignity, calm order, not ascetic, not neglectful, discipline. The Rebbe's core philosophy, this ties it together. The Rebbe did not glorify the body and did not reject the body. He taught the body is an instrument the soul expresses through it. Treat it with respect, not obsession. Private acts remain private. Holiness is shown in how you live, not what you choose, not what you just. Holiness is shown as in how you live, not what you disclose. What the Rebbe would strongly reject, he would reject analyzing sexual mechanics of rabbis, turning leaders into physiological case studies, by extreme by measuring holiness by bodily extremes, public speculation about private conduct, not because sex is bad, but because dignity matters. Bottom line, clean and honest. The Rebbe lived a married halakhic life. He valued intimacy as a mitzvah. He adjusted with age and health. He slept very little by choice and capacity. He never held that up as an ideal for others. He kept private life private. If Rambam is medicine and reason, the Rebbe's discipline and dignity.
But the Yochanan said it's not really a problem. Why? Because there's not a recipe, there's not immediacy, or I should say, there's no.
Is that the end of your story?
Because the focus is being given relationship and only being quote unquote repaid during the debate, because there's no immediate reciprocity, therefore this does not look like you're doing commerce with Shemitah produce. And therefore no Shemitah prohibition harms the time of the 8-year produce. That's the idea.
Chaya, yeah. Chaya Mushka Schneerson. Alright, is that the end of your fucking story though? Yeah, I wanted fucking techniques. I'll give you techniques, girl. She comes first. Big one. Yeah, why don't they talk about that? Yo, dog, but there are some things that are discussed, like the woman orgasming first and the man being on top to orgasm and the woman being on top for her orgasm, that kind of stuff. Give me that breakdown, even if it's not from a specific rabbi. Some rabbits and be like, yeah, bitch, give me that fucking shit. Calm down, woman. All right, I'll give you the clean, educational, non-graphic breakdown. No, not non-graphic of these ideas. As they show up across biology, psychology, and traditional moral thinking, without getting explicit or describing sexual acts. This is about patterns and theories, not instruction or porn. The woman first idea, where it comes from. This shows up in multiple cultures, not just Judaism. On a biological basis, many women take longer to reach arousal than men. Female arousal is often more gradual, more sensitive to context, safety, and attention. If a man finishes too early, intimacy may feel incomplete. So the idea developed attending to the woman's arousal first leads to better outcomes for both. This is health-based and relational, not mystical. Why some traditions emphasize the man not finishing first. Across ancient medical and ethical systems, female male climax is associated with physical depletion, emotional dissatisfaction, reducing bonding. So restraint was praised as self-control, attentiveness, maturity. This isn't about dominance, it's about reputation. Who is on top? What this is actually about. When people talk about man on top, woman on top, they're usually not talking about power, but about control and pacing. General idea, non-graphic. One partner controlling pace can reduce anxiety, increase comfort, allow better regulation of arousal. Different people respond differently, so traditions that talk about this are really saying adjust physical dynamics to match who needs more control or time. It's functional, not symbolic. Female pleasure being prioritized, not a modern invention. This surprises people. Ancient sources, including Jewish, believe female pleasure increased emotional attachment, relationship stability, likelihood of conception. This was their medical theory. So women's satisfactory wasn't ignored. It was seen as structurally important, even if discussed awkwardly. Why older tradition avoids details. Even when these ideas existed, traditions avoided step by step descriptions, explicit mechanics, public discussion. Why? To preserve privacy, to prevent voyeurism, to avoid turning intimacy into performance anxiety. They focus on principles, not techniques. Modern science mostly agrees with better language. Modern sex research says similar things, just cleaner. Mutual satisfaction matters more than mechanics. Timing differences are normal. Communication matters more than position. Pressure ruins outcomes. Attentiveness is better than technique. The science stripped away moral language but kept the core insight. The real takeaway, this is the key. All these discussions point to the same principle. Healthy intimacy is about responsiveness, pacing, and mutual awareness, not choreography. When people obsess over the rules, they miss the point. TLDR, straight, non weird version. Women often need more time, attention matters. Men finishing too early was historically discouraged self control. Physical arrangement talk is really about pacing and comfort. Female satisfaction has long been seen as important. Traditions avoided explicit detail on purpose. Modern science backs the underlying ideas. Tell me everything in Orthodox Judaism about it.
We don't view that your produce as an exchange, right? Whereas some like opinions ultimately again accept your produce, change the
All
produce.
right, I'll give you a complete Orthodox Judaism accurate overview, not explicit, serious, and internally faithful. This is principles, halakha, and values, not mechanics or erotic details. Sexuality in Orthodox Judaism, the full framework. Orthodox Judaism treats sex as real, embodied, regulated, meaningful, and private. It is neither taboo nor casual. Core premise: everything flows from this. Sex in Judaism is a mitzvah within marriage, not necessary, not a necessary evil, not purely for procreation, not ascetic, not performative, not public. The Torah assumes sexuality is powerful and therefore must be channeled, not denied. The mitzvah of Ona, central concept. What it is, Ona is the husband's halakhic obligation to ensure his wife's sexual and emotional satisfaction. This is explicit in Torah, Exodus 21, Talmud, Ketuvot, Rambam, Shulchan Aruch. Key points: sex is not permitted, it is owed. Frequency depends on health, work, age, mutual desire. The obligation is toward the woman and not the man. This alone already breaks a lot of stereotypes. Female pleasure is acknowledged without explicit detail. Orthodox sources recognize women may require more time, emotional safety matters, rushing is wrong, indifference is a violation of Ona, mutual desire is ideal, coercion is forbidden. The Talmud states clearly a man who ignores his wife's needs sins against her. This is legal language, not poetry. Order, modesty, and privacy. It's Neo. Orthodox Judaism insists on absolute privacy, no public discussion of sexual mechanics, no voyeurism, no instructional explicitness. This is why sources speak in euphemism, use principle language, avoid description, not because sex is dirty, but because dignity matters. Because dignity matters. Who initiates halakhically? Either spouse may initiate. A husband should be attentive to signals. A wife is not passive property. Desires should not be forced or ignored. Ideally, mutual interest, emotional attunement, calm atmosphere, timing, and mindset. Orthodox sources emphasize not when angry, not when exhausted, not when drunk, not immediately after heavy eating, not as an emotional escape, not mechanically. Sex should come from connection, not impulse. After intimacy, sources emphasize cleanliness, calm, emotional reassurance, respect, no immediate abandonment. Again, health plus dignity. Aging and sexuality. Orthodox Judaism is realistic. Desire changes with age. Frequency naturally decreases. There's no obligation to perform beyond capacity. Continued intimacy in old age is fine if mutually desired. Abstinence due to age is not sinful. Holiness is not measured by sexual output. What Orthodoxy explicitly rejects. Orthodox Judaism rejects casual sex, pure sexual culture, pornography, fetishizing religious figures, treating sex as a conquest, treating sex as conquest, treating sex as conquest, treating sex as shameful, treating technique as holiness. It also rejects guilt for normal desire, aesthetic hatred of the body. Kabbalah versus Halakha. Important distinction. Kabbalah adds symbolic meaning, but it does not override Halakha. It does not require special techniques. It does not mandate mystical intent. It is optional and secondary. Most Orthodox practice is halakhic. Most Orthodox practice is halakhic, not mystical. Why details are not spelled out? This matters. Orthodox Judaism assumes people can learn basic biology. Couples communicate privately. Rabbis answer questions discreetly. Public description degrades intimacy. So the system deliberately gives boundaries, gives values, avoids choreography. The governing principle, this is the essence. Sex is holy when it is private, mutual, respectful, health preserving, and emotionally attentive. Everything else is commentary, TLDR, but accurate. Sex is a mitzvah in marriage. Female satisfaction is a legal concern. Moderation and timing matter. Aging is normal. Privacy is sacred. Aging is norm. Aging is normal. Privacy is sacred. Aging is normal. Privacy is sacred. Explicit mechanics are intentionally absent. Holiness equals dignity plus responsibility. All right, that's a cool dog. Some rabbits gonna be like, I'm good. You're fired. Go fuck yourself.